Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to this live stream. I'm with the lovely Firas Zahabi again. MashaAllah, we're going to be discussing science as a religion, science as the way, the truth, and the life. Science as something more, way more than just a way of acquiring knowledge, more like a worldview, a philosophy, and so on and so forth. You guys get the point. So, Faraz, you had that very popular interview with Joe Rogan, right? But before we break into that, I wanted to ask you about, when it comes to science and the way that science, we've been, socialized into it having this high status. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, I believe science should have a high status. Science is supremely important. Okay, I'm a huge fan of science. Science is it's a brilliant formula. Okay, but we have to ask ourselves, we have to look beyond just the method, the scientific method. We have to ask ourselves, why do we use this? These are epistemological questions. These are questions philosophers and logicians, rational people, have to ask themselves. Deep thinkers have to ask themselves, what is science? Does science tell me everything about the universe? Is it absolute? Or does it just tell me one particular thing? What is this animal we call science? Okay, now we're getting into philosophy here. There's no scientific experiment that proves what science is.
Yeah.
We have to look at the back door. We have to look at the back end. We have to look what type of logic is science using. And that's the question for philosophers. Now, don't forget, science, the scientific method, comes from philosophy. Don't be fooled. Don't, some people try to say, oh, science is now outgrown philosophy. That's impossible. Science is a birth child of philosophy.
Yeah.
It comes from reason. It's a type of reason. It's a very particular type. There are other types of logic that are more certain than the scientific method also. So there are higher levels of reasoning.
Yeah. And I think that's a good sort of introduction, because essentially we don't have a problem. And I think this is what I really find good about the way that you convey things, is you're not throwing out the baby with the bathwater, right? You're not saying,
not at all.
oh, scientism is here, so let's become science deniers and wear tinfoil hats and talk about conspiracy theories. Yeah. What you're basically saying is, okay, it has a high status. And in fact, I think what's important here is not only speaking about why it's okay for it to have a high status, but also why Islam gives science a high status. But then the crux of the issue is what you mentioned about the hierarchy of epistemology in terms of where does it actually fit. Now, before we get into that, let's go into why is science important. So there's some interesting things that Imam Ghazali said about science, and science being a type of collective fard that people need to be involved in for medical purposes and for the purposes of benefiting human beings. In fact, we find in his writings where he speaks about not enough Muslims actually being involved in medicine, and in fact that being detrimental to the ummah, and in fact speaking about how there is a disproportionate number of people who are studying Islamic jurisprudence when there are other people who are requiring things like medicine, and there's not enough of them. And I don't remember the exact analogy he gave, but we find this amongst the scholars of Islam, that they actually gave science this high status.
Absolutely. Well, they didn't use the term science. The term science came later, but he called it demonstration. If you believe something, show me a demonstration. I won't accept it without a demonstration. But what did he mean by demonstration and proofs? Well, of course, if Ghazali, he knew the Quran very well. The Quran is always asking for proofs. If you say this, bring your proofs. If you say this. So the lingo was different, the language was different, but definitely science is a type of proof. Now, what type of proof is?
Okay, can you guys hear me? Press 1 if you can hear me. Okay, you're back. We lost you for a few seconds.
You lost me? Okay.
Yes.
What was the last thing I said?
Do
you remember?
You said the Quran asks us for evidence.
It always asks for proofs. Okay, so when Ghazali was challenged by certain philosophers, he asked, show me demonstration, show me proofs. Now, science is a type of proof. It proves a certain thing. Now, what does science prove? Science, and bring me any philosopher of science. Don't bring me a scientist. Okay, scientists don't necessarily understand the philosophy of science.
Yeah.
Scientists can be trained in the scientific method. They understand the formula. They understand the rules. Okay, now the rules are not written in stone. There's a type of it's funny because science is not an exact science. Okay, you can have levels of control. You can have levels of how scientific something can be. Okay, it's not a black and white formula. They're trained in this formula. The philosophers of science will tell you they understand how the formula works. They understand why the formula is set the way it is. Okay. Now, philosophers of science are philosophers themselves. Okay, they're on equal par with philosophers. There are different types of philosophers. You ask any philosopher of science, you tell them, "Hey, Firas Zahabi from Canada says science is the recognition of patterns and regularities in nature, in the outside world." That's all it is. Now, people make science people want science to be everything. Oh, science is going to tell me how to have a relationship. Science is going to tell me about morality. No, science doesn't do these things. Science is going to tell me if there's a God or not. Science doesn't do any of that. That's philosophy. That's rationality, logic. If you don't like the word philosophy, because philosophy comes with a lot of stigma, we should talk about that as well. Okay, and then that has partly to do with Ghazali. Ghazali was not anti-logic. Okay, he's 100% pro-logic. Just quickly, when Ghazali wrote a famous book, for those Muslims who don't know, he wrote a famous book called the Destruction of the Philosophers. Muslims today, without reading it, think, oh yeah, destroy philosophy. Philosophy is no good. You know, what does philosophy mean? Okay, philosophy means lover of wisdom. That's what it literally means. Okay, but when we say philosophy today, we mean logicians, rational thinkers, people who study logic. Do you think Ghazali was saying, don't study logic, let me destroy logic? No, that's not at all what he was saying. He was referring, when he said the philosophers, he wasn't saying people who use logic, because he was using logic. All his peers were using logic. Okay, he was talking about people who blind follow Aristotle. He was calling them the philosophers, because every Muslim at that time saw himself as a rationalist, as a logician. He wasn't attacking logic. He was saying you're blind following Aristotle. Okay, this is very well highlighted in Frank Griffel's work. I can't recommend his work enough. He wrote a book on the theology, the philosophical theology of Ghazali, an amazing book. And the reason why I recommend it so highly is not only is a professor in Islamic studies, but also he also went and he got the actual manuscripts and found out which manuscripts are authentic and which are not. Okay, he did a lot of background work that hadn't been done before him. Okay, but basically Ghazali was not anti-philosophy. Muslims have to stop saying that. Okay, and I know there's more to the story. It's not the topic of the day, but this is something we have to address. Muslims should be rational, logical, scientific, all these things. You have to be studying. You have to be an intellectual, an academic. This is part of being a Muslim.
Yeah, and I think that's a separate episode, inshallah, we can do with you in terms of, is philosophy haram? I'm not sure if you saw a video that me and Hijab did on this topic. It was quite brief, actually. It was one of those late night videos we just churned out. But what happened is, in the comment section and then some rebuttals, there was actually a lot more. So I definitely want to bring you back for that.
There is a lot more. There is a lot more. I would say, look, in short, sophistry is haram. Yes, but logic is not haram. Take logic to the highest level. Listen, if you should never run away from logic. Now, there's more to say. I'm sure we'll get to, we'll touch on it because it's a topic that's always going to be weaved into every topic we talk about. But ultimately speaking, what I was saying earlier is, what does science tell us? Science is repeatable. Okay. Hassan ibn al-Haytham wrote famously, see for yourself. Well, what did he mean by see for yourself? Here are the parameters of my experiment. You can repeat it yourself. I'm writing about my results. If you turn water into wine and you did it in your lab, we don't believe it until we can do it ourselves. We're going to repeat your experiment and we want to see for ourselves. This is what Hassan ibn al-Haytham said, the man who formulated the modern scientific method. Okay, you have a hypothesis, you have a control, you have a scientific experiment with parameters that somebody else can recreate. What is he doing? He's discovering a pattern, and he says, look, observe this pattern that happened in the past. If you recreate the exact same situation, it'll also happen before your eyes. You'll have the same results. If it's not, then it's not scientific. If we can't repeat it, it's not scientific. Now, science also evolved. Now we have falsification. We have, but that's what also science is predictive, because we believe that what happened in the past will happen again in the future. That's what science tells us. Science is the observation of regularities and patterns in nature. Different patterns and regularities in nature. Now, this is very important in Islam. Extremely important. And I think that's lost on most Muslims. They don't understand this, because the Quran is constantly telling you, look at the cycles in nature. Observe the cycles in nature. For the men of knowledge, you're going to recognize the signs of God. Now, this is, you see, I don't know if we're getting into it right now, but you should. Ghazali was a nominalist. Okay, now what's a nominalist? No, nominalist is it's quite hard to explain. Okay, but a nominalist, we don't believe in universals. There are only particulars. Okay, so let's talk about it. Let's look at Aristotle and Plato. Okay, now these two guys were almost opposites. Aristotle and Plato. Don't forget, Plato was the teacher of Aristotle. Excuse me. Aristotle famously disagreed with his master, Plato. Famously. Okay, so let me try to make this super clear and easy to follow. Okay, let's take the example of Aristotle. Look at knives. Okay, let's say I bring you 100 knives, and you're a young child. You've never seen a knife before, and I show you 100 knives. I cut bread, I cut vegetables, I cut all sorts of things, and I make you understand what a knife is. I showed you 100 different knives with 100 different handles and a different shape, and you started to understand the essence of knife. Now I bring you 101 knife. You haven't seen this knife before. You've only studied these 100 other knives. Now this is knife number 101. And you tell me, hey, that's a knife. Why? You haven't seen. How do you know that's a knife? It has the same essence as the other 100 knives I see. So now you've developed in your mind what a knife is. You have this essence of a knife. If I take that knife, for instance, and I destroy it, I crush it, I melt it down, and I turn it into something else, you're going to tell me that's no longer a knife.
Yeah.
If I take a piece of paper and pencil and I draw you a knife, and you're gonna be like, look, that resembles the essence of a knife. It's a paper knife, but it has that essence. It has that something that makes it a knife. Okay. If I give you a plastic knife, you're gonna be like, that's a plastic knife. But I'll tell you, look, all the knives I showed you before were all made of metal. Doesn't matter. I recognize it as a knife. Why? Somehow, some way, it has that essence of a knife. Okay. So Aristotle said, first, you see knives, and then you develop this essence of knives. You have this idea of knife in your head. Okay. Now, Plato said the opposite. Plato said, no, you were born with the idea of this perfect knife in your mind.
Yeah.
And then you saw a knife in nature, and you said, that reminds me of knife. Okay. It's a bit of an oversimplification of Plato's forms.
Yeah.
And a lot of philosophers today, we all agree with Aristotle. We think, no, first you saw a knife, and then you came up with the essence of knife. Now, I believe both men are right. I believe Plato is right in one sense, and Aristotle is correct in one sense. You see, when we say the word nature, if I ask you, Sabur, what is nature? You're going to be like, well, look at that stream over there. Just observe the water cycle. Look at this flower that grew. Look at this climate. Look at this condensation. You're gonna point to different particulars, just like Aristotle pointed to different knives. He showed you 101 knives. I show you 101 instances in nature, in the outside world. Then you develop this essence in your mind. You start thinking, hey, things that are outside there in the world is what we call nature. Then one day you walk around a species of flowers you've never seen. You're like, that's nature.
Yep.
Nature is a collage of particulars. It's an idea that rests on particulars. Okay, we can make artificial, this is what we call a universal. In philosophy, nominalists, we call that a universal. You have particulars, each knife, and then you have the essence of a knife, which is the universal of knife. Okay, so let's say I were to tell you, what is a government? Maybe you point at a government building. Maybe you point at a government worker. Maybe you point at paperwork, some paperwork. Now, if I tell you, look, if I break that building, is the government destroyed? You'd be like, no, there's still the collective understanding of government. These people are cooperating in a sense.
Yep.
So the government is an idea. It's not necessarily this physical thing. Okay, so we have these particulars that make up a universal. Now, nominalists like me, like Ghazali, we don't believe universals exist out there. They exist conceptually.
Yep.
So when we say nature, what are you saying? You're talking about the collective of particulars. But people take it as a thing out there. They take it as a force. It's not a force. It's just a name for all these particulars. Okay? So let's say, for instance, let's take another particular. Let's look at an egg. Okay? If I take one egg and I take it in front of you and I scramble it and I put its contents in a bowl, and this is going to sound weird, okay? I've destroyed the egg. It's in a bowl. It's just mashed up in a bowl.
Yep.
How many ways can I scramble an egg? How many ways can you break an egg into a scrambled form.
Almost infinite, right?
Almost
Like,
infinite.
yeah, like you're talking about twisting and turning it, or what do you mean?
There's if I blend it in a and I change this material substance around, how many ways can I do that? Almost infinite.
Yeah.
But there's only one way it could be whole. So you see an ordered egg, that's one. There's just one. But there's there's an infinite amount of ways almost to scramble it. Yes or no? Okay.
Yeah.
So let's say I take that egg and I scramble it in a bowl and I chuck it. I throw it in the air. It's gonna land in a secondary and a new scrambled way. So yeah, you scramble it in the bowl, then you throw it on the ground, and it scrambles on the ground. Yeah. Let's say I were to do that an unimaginable amount of times. How many times would it take me to scramble an egg in a bowl, throw it on the floor for it to land whole? Because the whole egg is just one particular instance. It's just one of the many formations. It's one of the many infinite ways it can land. Yes or no?
Yeah.
Now the the odds of it landing that way are astronomical. Exactly. And if you had an infinite amount of time, maybe it will land that way. But when we look in nature, as we said, all we see is we see whole eggs all the time. Why is the egg always in this one particular form? There's a million ways for it to be scrambled. A million ways is an understatement.
Yep.
But there's only one particular way it could be whole. Yet you go out in nature and you find whole eggs all the time. You find order in nature all the time. So we have to ask ourselves, where does this order come from? It comes from this cycle. There's a cycle, okay? A chicken feeds in the grass, and then one day it lays an egg, okay? And it has all this biology behind it. It lays this perfect egg. And we ask ourselves, philosophers ask ourselves, why did it come in perfect order? Well, it's this cycle, okay? Well, it begs the question, what made this cycle? And then people often, a layman will tell you, nature. But the problem what he doesn't understand is his idea of nature came from that particular. It came after he saw the miracle of an egg getting put in whole in that one particular way that it could be. His idea of nature came afterwards. We need the particular. We're looking for the particular. The particular came first. Okay, so let me explain that to you. Imagine, let's go back to our knife experiment. Okay, please tell me if I'm going too far in the deep end here.
No.
But this is Aristotle and Plato. Okay, there's a famous clash between the two. Imagine Aristotle discovered a divine knife. This knife is the only knife in existence. There is no other knife.
Yep.
This knife always was, and this knife will never change. It's perfect. You don't add or subtract. It doesn't decay. It doesn't grow. It doesn't shrink. It's perfect. Nothing is ever added or subtracted. It's perfect. That knife is the only one in existence. And I assure you, there will never be another knife. And there was never a knife before it. And this knife always was. Now, if I ask you about the divine knife, if I say, hey, Sabur, how much does a knife weigh? If there's only one divine knife, you would give me an exact number because now it's objective.
Yeah.
Knives are objective. If we're an earthly knife, let's say there's 100,000 different knives, you would say, well, it depends the weight. There are different types of knife. Now you're referring to the essence of knife. A knife doesn't have a particular weight. That's not what the essence of a knife is. A knife has to cut. It has to have a handle. It has to have a particular function. But that's not true about the divine knife. The divine knife is a particular. We have particulars, and then we have the universal. The earthly knives are subject to this universal interpretation, this essence of knife. Like human beings, okay, there's a universal to human beings. What is a human being? Well, a human being has these characteristics. There's not one divine absolute human being.
Yeah.
Because if there was one absolute divine human being, he would have to be the only one and unchanging. He would have to be unchanging. That's why when the Quran is always talking about God as this one particular unchanging, and he's one, the Quran is telling you this is a literal objective being. Whereas when we talk about nature, nature is a universal. It is not a particular. Because here we have to highlight the difference between nature and God, because scientists, in my opinion, their God is nature. That's what I assume. Like when I talk to scientists and we cross-examine what they believe, I say, look, the way you hold nature You're holding him as a god. You're holding nature as your god. Because when you ask them, how did this process happen? They say nature. Nature is just a poof, magical word. That cycle. How did that cycle happen? Oh, nature. What does that mean, nature? That's just a sound you made with your mouth. It doesn't explain anything. What is nature? Now, I believe my idea of nature came for after I saw this cycle. I observed the cycle of nature. I observed it. We used nature as a way to point to something. But that came after. My idea of nature came after I saw all the knives. I saw all these cycles in nature, and then I developed this idea of nature. I'm asking you, what came before nature? What came before the cycle?
Yeah.
They're placing nature before the cycle. I'm saying, no, nature came after the cycle.
Yeah.
I'm looking for the particular. You're giving me the universal. Nominalists, we can identify what is a particular and what is a universal. Now, it's not always easy. But let me tell you, it's not always easy. But just like how you learned about knives, you developed a universal idea of what a knife is. When you saw all these cycles in nature, let's say, for instance, I build you a fire. The ash climbs in the air, it goes in the air, it goes up in smoke, it lands on the earth, and it gives nutrients to the earth. It recycles nutrients in the earth. A new seed, it mingles with a new seed, and you have a new tree, and then somebody chops that tree down and builds another fire. There's this cycle. Now we're asking, somebody explain us this cycle. Now there are philosophers of science that have famously commented on this, and of course philosophers in general, theologians, etc. This is a topic that now you're in philosophy now. You're in philosophy. You're not in the scientific method no more.
Yeah.
It's not something we're going to do in a lab. This is comes to deductive and deductive reason, not inductive reason. Okay, there's two different types of logic here. There's one that's deductive and one that's inductive. Inductive logic you do in a lab. Deductive logic you do it through conversation, or think mathematics. Mathematics versus biology. Mathematics is deductive. Biology is inductive. It's dealing with contingent things. Okay, so what I'm saying is, we saw all these cycles in nature, and then we saw all these cycles out there in the world, and then we developed our idea of nature. Just like we saw all these knives, and then we developed an idea of what a knife is. What the Quran is telling you, look, what came before the cycle? Because your idea of nature came after the cycle. What came before would have to be a particular, not a universal, because don't forget, universals are byproducts of particulars. When the Quran is telling you, look, God is one, God is one, the Quran is telling you God is literally out there in existence. When we talk about nature, we're using metaphor now. Nature is a word that refers to all those particulars we observe. When I say knife, I'm not talking about I'm talking about, well, hey, you know what? I'm going out to buy a knife. I'm not telling you I'm going out to buy a particular knife. I'm saying any knife. I need a knife. I need to go buy a knife. Okay. Now Plato was correct. In my opinion, he was very close to discovering the fitra, because he understood he was born with innate ideas, and he was trying to find a place for these innate ideas. In my opinion, he missed the mark, and a lot of philosophers cross-examine him, and they find inconsistencies in his reasoning. But he was very close.
I mean, there's something that he says about the forms and how they remind you.
Exactly. Exactly. He was very close. He was very, very close. Now you have to understand, Plato was trying to reconcile Parmenides and Heraclitus. Heraclitus says, look, the whole world is like a river. You can't step in the same river twice. What does that mean? Look, the whole world is in decay. The whole world is in flux, actually.
Yeah.
The dunya is changing before your eyes, even though you don't see it. The world outside you is changing. It's constantly in flux. Yet Parmenides said the opposite. Parmenides said, look, the world is one whole block. It's funny because Ghazali actually comments on his position. So Ghazali had read Parmenides. He had understood. He had come across at least one source of Parmenides. Parmenides is saying, look, there is no flux, there is no motion, there is no this. The universe is just one block, okay, so to speak. Heraclitus is saying the total opposite. Okay, so we have two opposites. Plato was kind of stuck in the middle. He was kind of giving us dualism. He was trying to reconcile the two. Plato, I think, got really close to mysticism, to understanding the whole, yet he kind of missed the mark a little bit because he applied it to all. He applied the particular to all, and he tried to make everything innate. Because Socrates / Plato, whenever I use the word Plato, I could also mean Socrates and vice versa. Because scholars are not sure that Plato hear what Socrates said and write it down, or did he just use the name Socrates, and those were all his ideas. Okay, so the word Plato and Socrates are always interchangeable. Socrates said he went too far. He overstated. He said all learning is remembering. You already know everything, which I disagree. Okay, I think Aristotle proved him wrong. We do remember some things. There is innate knowledge. There's no doubt we have innate knowledge. Okay, there's actually some really interesting experiments. Maybe one day we can discuss. They do on newborn babies. They definitely have a predisposition. They're not born tabula rasa 100%.
Yeah.
Okay. There is, tabula rasa means a clean slate. Okay. Think of a virgin piece of paper, a virgin piece of clay. John Locke says, you're born a complete blank slate.
But by the way, I just wanted to add, most of the scientists and sociologists today are affected by this blank slate model. Mm-hmm. So they call it the standard social sciences model, which is why they believe in cultural relativism, right? Mm-hmm. Why we're sort of, and this is actually going wild in Canada, by the way.
Oh yeah, of course, absolutely. But you know what? There's one great rebuttal to this. Immanuel Kant, he was a profound thinker. I really believe he read a lot of Ghazali and Ibn Arabi. Honestly, no doubt about it.
I mean, Imam Ghazali definitely read. That's like 100%.
There's no doubt in my mind, because so much of what he said has already been said, and it's extremely interesting. Okay, we have to ask, okay, because they say that everything in the tabula rasa. Think about a newborn baby. John Locke is telling you, look, he's a blank sheet of paper. Yeah. There's nothing that's going to be in his mind, in his thoughts, that hasn't been in the senses. Your eyes, your tasting, your hearing, your smell. And then once it's in the senses, it goes on this tabula rasa. So let's say you ate an apple. Okay, now you know the color red. You know about sweetness. You know about flesh, the flesh of the apple. You know about mass. You held the apple, it had a weight. Before that, it wasn't on your tabula rasa. Okay, so we're writing on your tabula rasa all your experiences. Okay, so then one day you touch something hot for the first time, you get burned. But before that, you had no notion of being burned. So, okay, now you have the understanding of what it's like to be burned, etc. So now your tabula rasa is starting to get filled. Once it's filled, that tabula rasa, you can mix and match now. You can kind of copy and paste ideas. You can think of a green apple. Maybe you've never seen a green apple. Yeah. They exist, of course, but you saw a red apple, and then you saw a green cucumber. So you mix the two ideas together. Okay, so what John Locke is saying is that everything on the tabula rasa is a composite of things that were in the senses: taste, touch, smell, hearing, etc. But Kant asked, okay, perfect. But what about the tabula rasa itself?
Yeah.
Where did that come from? Where did we see that in the world? It's something very particular. Now, the reason why I say he read Ghazali is because Ghazali boils it down. It's all about reductionism. What is reductionism? Well, if I tell you, look, some guy stops at a stop sign in his car, and I ask you, why did he stop at a stop sign? Well, he pushed on the brake, and the brake activated these brake pads, and it slowed the car down. Well, you have to ask yourself, why did he push the brake? Well, he saw a stop sign. Why did he push the brake when he saw the stop sign? Well, because he went to driving school. And driving school, they told him when you see a stop sign, you have to push the brake. Why did the driving school tell him that he has to push the brake when he sees the stop sign? Well, because, there are these laws that were formulated because people were crashing into each other. Why do people care that people were crashing into each other? And you're going to keep reducing it back and all the way to the beginning of time.
Yeah.
When you reduce it far enough, I'll tell you something, 99% of people stop at pragmatism. Okay, we don't have to reduce it anymore. It's pragmatic. We know we have an answer that allows us to function in the world. We don't need to go any further. It's only philosophers and theologians that go that far. They actually care. They're curious. But that curiosity is going to bring you to a realization that it all boils down to a point of awareness.
Yeah.
There is a point of awareness. And that point of awareness, the entire world is contained in it. Your whole body, the tabula rasa, the whole world is contained in tabula rasa. Even your flesh and bones, everything about you, everything about the dunya. This tabula rasa, this one point of awareness encompasses the entire world. And you can no longer reduce any further. All you can do is behold it. Now, it takes a very special mind. It takes a very special type of a thinker. And I truly believe that the words La ilaha illallah, that's what it really... This is what it ultimately means.
Smashing all the idols, yeah.
This is if you read Ghazali, in the end, the wasilin, the people who arrive, they arrive just to behold this one perfection, this one unexplainable. You cannot bring this into the arena of logic and cross-examination. Ibn Arabi said it beautifully. He says, God gave you the scales, meaning your ability to measure and count and decipher, to measure the dunya, not to measure him.
Press 1 if you can hear me, but you cannot hear him, Firas, because I've lost him for a few seconds. Okay, so I'm guessing you guys can hear me. Tell us what you think so far, this discussion. Screen froze for Firas. Yep, that's what's happening to me as well. Hope you guys are enjoying this live. I haven't done these types of lives for a while now. And we have lost him. Just messaging him now. Interesting. Someone said Mossad hacked Firaz's Wi-Fi. Not sure why they would want to do that, but he's back. There you are.
What happened? I have no idea. My computer just turned.
Yeah, it's this first time you froze and then he came back. This time you froze and then you went off.
I don't know. I just got this computer fixed. It's the first time I turned it back on. So it's the first time in over a month. I broke and I had to send it in. And sorry about that. I have no idea what's going on.
I think it might be an internet issue. I don't think. Yeah, but it's okay. I mean, right now it's fine, and hopefully,
there are 164 issues slowing down your computer. Okay, I'll fix that later. And so I just got it back, so I have no idea. I mean, I'm really bad with computers. Really, I apologize.
Yeah.
So we're all good.
Yeah, somebody is saying Mossad hacked Firaz's Wi-Fi, and then I was asking, why would Mossad be interested in this topic?
Who's Mossad? I don't even know.
Intelligence.
What's that?
Israeli intelligence.
Okay, I see.
Oh, someone was just trying to come up with their own conspiracy theory. I don't think they're interested in knowing about these intricate ideas about philosophy and whatnot. So the last thing that you said, guys, could you in the comment section let me know the last thing you heard Firas say? Because I was trying to bring him back and I actually forgot the last part he was actually saying. From what I
don't recall either, unfortunately. Doesn't matter. Let's move on. No problem.
Yeah. Back on it. I mean, there's something that you said which I didn't want to break your flow and bring it in again, but I think it's very important. You see, some maybe 10 minutes earlier, 15 minutes earlier, you said something to the effect of, you see, when Imam Ghazali was challenging the philosophers, he was actually not challenging philosophers, but a particular type of philosophy. Mm-hmm. But then you actually said something that, look, Aristotle was very popular and he was challenging Aristotle. Now, Aristotle's view on science, and in fact, the very thing that medieval Europe had to go through, where they had to chuck out that type of philosophy. And in fact, this is a bit of a pandemic amongst Greek philosophers, in which rather than trying to falsify, which is what science does, some of them were promoting the idea of science is there to simply reconfirm what you already have. So the observations are there to reconfirm the theory rather than to falsify the theory. And I think that's also important to understand, because people normally think Aristotle, yep, great scientific mind, and not quite.
Well, he was a brilliant human being. There's no doubt.
Yeah,
he made mistakes. Absolutely. He made mistakes, no doubt. But here's the thing. Ghazali understood well that we don't know there could always be something missing in our empirical beliefs. When we look at the dunya and we think we see something so clear, we could always be mistaken. Now, let me give you an example, if you don't mind. Don't forget, Aristotle was one of the most brilliant human beings in history. Guys, make no mistake about it. The guy was a pure genius. Make no mistake about it. Did he make mistakes? Yes. Are we making mistakes today? 100 years from now, they're going to be laughing at us. 1,000 years from now, just 5 years from now, they're going to be laughing at us? Yes. But you know what? That's how the world appeared to us. Let me give you an example, okay? When you drop something, does it fall towards the center of the earth?
Yep.
It always does. Aristotle said, look, everything seems to be falling towards the center of the earth. He observed it naturally. Everybody agreed with him. Hey, do you see that too? When you throw something in the air, doesn't it fall back down towards the earth? He's like, yeah, we all see it. Well, you know what? We might be the center of the universe. Yep. Then he said, you know what? Everything's orbiting around us. Maybe we're the center of the universe. Yeah, it makes sense. To them, it was making. What's more evidence? Well, look, put your hand out. Put your hand out. You don't feel a gust of wind, but when you're traveling on a chariot and you push your hand out, you feel wind. If the world was rotating, again, he was wrong, guys. I'm just saying the evidence was pointing to he's correct.
Yep.
I don't feel a gust of wind. If the world was rotating around the sun, because don't forget, they did have that debate in ancient Greece. Some people did believe the earth rotates around the sun.
Yeah.
The vast majority believe the sun rotates around the earth. Why? They got up every morning and they saw the sun rotating around the earth. Of course, it was an illusion. However, Aristotle said, look, if the earth was moving, shouldn't I feel air blowing on my arm all the time? Shouldn't I feel a gust of air? It was very consistent with how they understood the world. It's a narrative. This in philosophy, we call it a narrative. It's not proof. It's never proof, guys. It's a narrative. Now, it fits perfectly with his hypothesis that we're the center of the earth. Yeah. If I told him, no, listen, when the earth is moving, all air is moving with you. And there's an atmosphere around you. You can't see it with your eye. He would have been like, what's your proof of an atmosphere? What's your proof that we're like? He could have questioned me. We would have been at a lock. Two opposite theories that fit the same amount of facts, the facts perfectly. The facts at hand at the time. Don't forget, I'm not talking about today's modern facts. Aristotle didn't have today's modern facts. We have to work with the fact. This is a historian's fallacy. You make decisions and judgments about people of the past, but you're using the facts of today. No. Put yourself in his shoes. What he saw, what he observed, what he knew at the time, how the world looked at him. You have to put yourself in the thick of it. Okay? Put yourself in his place. Wouldn't it not have been incredibly convincing? At the time, I would have been, you know what? It makes sense. Now, if you told me, Firas, are you 100% sure you're the center of the universe? I would have said no. Because like I say today, of all of our scientific theories and facts, I tell them, look, this is what it seems like to us. It could be always, and by the way, this is the heart of science. The heart of science, an inductive fact can always be disproven in the future. Always.
Yeah.
Take, for instance, do frogs swim? We've talked about this in the past. Maybe Aristotle observes 1,000 frogs and he sees they all swim. He wants to write down a fact. He wants to write down all frogs swim. He always has to do it off a set of particulars. How many frogs would you observe before you're confident to write it down as a fact that all frogs swim? Is it 100 frogs, 1,000 frogs, 1,000,000 frogs? Can you study enough frogs in your lifetime to be 100% certain that all frogs forever will swim?
Yeah.
You can never have enough observation to be sure, because in the future, frogs might not swim. There are turtles that don't swim. I was shocked when I went to a pet store once. I was like, hey, I want to buy this turtle. They're like, but don't put it in water. I'm like, why? Oh, it doesn't swim. I'm like, what? A turtle doesn't swim? I couldn't believe it. But it doesn't violate the rules of logic, the laws of logic at all. Aristotle would have to define what a frog is. He observes what frogs do, but he can never know what the frogs of the future, if they're going to lose those abilities. And maybe there are species that are not observed. He never has an inductive reasoning. We never have the totality of evidence. Aristotle didn't observe the frogs of the past and the frogs of the future. Now, you might seem that's overkill. You want to be extremely sure. How many narratives in science have been overturned? Countless. We believed so many things. As a matter of fact, today, some scientists believe we are the center of the universe. I don't know if you ever heard of the axis of evil.
No.
You should look it up. It's very interesting. Okay, type in cosmology, axis of evil.
No.
Some people believe, I don't want to say this because people think, Zahabi's crazy. Some people believe we are. So Aristotle was right. He was right for the wrong reasons. But he may be right. Our position in the galaxy and the universe, excuse me, may be the center. They call it the axis of evil, and you should look into why they call it the axis of evil. Actually, it's another interesting story.
Yeah, I mean, I've met somebody who actually really believes in this. They believe we are the center of the universe. This person has a physics degree from University College London, which is like one of the most prestigious universities, imperial type universities in the UK. And you know, everything you give him, he'll just refute it and be like, nope, 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 because of this.
Well, I want to know why he believes we're the center of the universe. I'm not saying I know. I'm not a cosmologist. I'm not an expert in the universe. But there are some experts that say, look, no, we are the center of the universe. Aristotle was right. His arguments were wrong, but his position was correct.
I think this person is more inclined towards, you know, maybe this is my interpretation. The implications of if we are the center, I think, are quite enticing for him.
That's why by the way, that's why they call it the axis of evil, because they're like, oh, religious people are going to say we're unique, we're special.
Right.
So they named it the axis of evil because that axis that they draw, we're on it. It's our home address. That's the center of the universe. Oh, well, guess what? They're going to use it for evil now. They're going to use it to propagate religion. Because what are the odds we're the center? It'll be astronomical. So it's something interesting to look up and read upon. Again, that's outside my field. But for me, I don't put all my eggs in that one basket, because eventually that could be overturned again. There's always new things. There's always things we don't know. When we observe nature, nature is always a mystery to us. The world out there is always, we never have the totality of evidence. So we have to be very cautious. So let me give you a thought example, a thought experiment that I call 1,001 narratives to help illustrate this. Okay. Let's say I call it 1,001 narratives. Because I can come up with 1,001 narratives. Because you have to understand, a lot of what we believe are narratives. In philosophy, we want proof. We want no narrative in the future to come in. We don't want to be subject to being overturned in the future. Yeah. This is Ghazali, by the way. Okay. Ghazali's definition of truth was very different than most philosophers. His definition of truth was exactly like Descartes. Descartes came 600 years later. He said, there must be no doubt. That's my definition of truth. If there's a doubt, it's not necessarily true. It could be true. It could not be true. It has to have no speck of doubt. Okay. So that comes down to that point of awareness. And he made this discovery that comes later.
Yeah.
I forget what I was saying.
No, what you were saying was that his view was that truth is something which is
that's
without
his definition of truth. Sorry, I remember now. 1,001 narratives.
1,001 narratives.
Sorry, I just finished wrestling. I wrestled for 3 hours today. I'm dead. 1,001. Okay.
This is when we're gonna get the best out of you.
Inshallah. Let's say you see a man walking across the room, and the man slips and falls. Okay, this is a thought experiment. It's meant to be thought-provoking. That's all it is. It's a thought experiment. There's no right and wrong answers right now. It's just to be thought-provoking. Okay, take it as that. It's an exercise. You see a man walk across the room and he slips and falls. And you have 1,001 observers. And they're all smart, intelligent people. Okay. The first guy says, well, his shoelaces are untied. That's why he slipped and fell. The second person says, no, I'm a doctor. I'm a neurologist. And that man has a brain tumor. He's my patient. And the brain tumor is affecting his coordination and balance. And that's why he slipped and fell. The next man says, no, I'm a seismologist. And I recorded an earthquake, a very mild earthquake, but just enough to make a man slip and fall. Another man says, no, I'm a psychologist. He slipped and fell because as a child, he didn't get enough attention. And he saw us. So he wanted attention. He wanted to be the center of attention. And he fell. And I can give you 1,001 narratives. Another man could say, no, I'm a carpenter and the floor is slightly tilted. That's why the man slipped and fell. Oh, no, I'm so-and-so. And I believe I make shoes for a living and that man's shoes has a defect. That's why he slipped and fell. There was no rubber coating or whatnot. I can see the same fact and put 101 narratives. Now, science comes along and tries to reproduce that event and eliminate the narratives. Okay, so we take a guy with no brain tumor. We take 100,000 people, make them walk across the same floor in the same condition. Some people with brain tumors, some people with no brain tumors, and we see, is the brain tumor theory narrative possible? Is the seismologist correct? Who is correct?
Yeah,
the janitor might come out and say, "Look, I mopped those floors, but I might have put a little too much soap this time, and that's why he fell." There is 1,001 narratives to weed out. Now, here's the thing. I said 1,001 narratives, but the truth is there's an infinite amount of narratives.
Yeah.
So we as thinkers have to go and weed out all the narratives. Now, there are many ancient narratives that sounded so brilliant, so correct. Like Aristotle's argument for why we are the center of the universe, in my opinion, was very convincing for the people at the time.
Yeah.
But it was a narrative. Philosophers recognize it as a narrative. Now, if I asked Aristotle, hey, are you 100% sure? He would have said no. He would have said no. I guarantee you. He was just saying, look, guys, this is my estimate of where we are. So in science, we're always trying to eliminate every other possible narrative. We all observe the same facts. We all observe the same patterns and regularities. But science cannot give us a narrative on God or morality or these kind of... This is outside of science. Science is going to tell us what are the patterns and regularities that are happening out there, and give them names, test them, secure that they're correct, eliminate other narratives that are they're not candidates for possibility, and allow us the right to test every narrative. But what happens is they choose a narrative that most of them agree upon, and then every other narrative is it's looked down upon. Why? So, it's also as logically valid.
Yeah. Also, a question for you here about these narratives, right? So, for example, when it comes to something in science which is sort of rubbished, it's seen as what you were saying in the Joe Rogan interview as woo-woo, right?
Yeah.
It's seen, and that's to do with near-death experiences, right? So you have this entire corpus of literature which has gone through the peer-reviewed process. It's been even published by journals like Lancet, which are quite prestigious, about how people have these experiences, out-of-body experiences, which have repeatedly been seen. However, because it doesn't fit their standard narratives, they're always trying to give ad hoc rationalizations.
This is the basis for scientific revolution. This is what Kuhn taught us. He said, look, every theory, every fact, every worldview has a little bit of things that don't agree with it. They don't fit. And those things that they go against the narrative, like for instance, evolution, from what I understand, I'm not in that world, but I like to listen to their debates. I'm fascinated. I like to cross-examine their debates. Let them convince me. I'm not an expert in these fields, but microbiology is a problem, right? The single cell is hyper complex. Now they're asking, because it's hyper complex, you have to tell us how that single cell got to be. Okay, so there's some interesting conversations. Very interesting conversations there. And like Dave Berlinski, he's a thorn in their side many times. And that narrative doesn't fit perfectly as those facts that don't fit in the theory start to pool. Eventually we have a new theory that comes and brings these narratives these facts that didn't fit the narrative. And now there's a new narrative that fits everything together again. And the cycle continues. That's when you have a scientific revolution. And Kuhn says you can have large or small scientific revolutions. It happened in the past over and over again. It happened in the past over and over again to the greatest thinkers. That's why I really believe that, look, we're always in a narrative. When it comes to empiricism, when it comes to the senses, when it comes to the world we're studying out there, we can never be sure of what we don't know. Now, this is known, for those of you who really want to go deep into it, it's known as the problem of induction.
Yeah.
First, you have to know the problem of induction, and then you have to know the problem of causation. If you understand these two, then you can really understand what I mean by narratives could always be overturned. The same facts can have a different story superimposed on them. It's happened endless. There's a time, they believe in spontaneous generation. Which,
to be honest, abiogenesis and all the theories today, it's just a fancy way of...
it's an appeal to magic. It's a poof magic.
Yeah.
Where you have to reduce it further, but they just make an appeal to magic. They just say, well, that's how it happened. Well, you just say the word miracle then. Just say the word miracle. That's why scientists say, oh, we need one miracle and then we'll take care of the rest. That's not untrue, but you still need that one miracle.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the way Dawkins mentions it in The God Delusion is, we just need that one luck. And then we can explain the rest.
Luck is a universal, my friend. Randomness is a universal. We've talked about this in the past. Look, I don't have a problem with evolution so far as from what I have understood. Again, I'm not an expert in that, but the only thing I reject is they say it's random. Random is rejected by nominalists. That
Well,
is a universal. That's an after the fact observance.
yeah, I mean that's the crux of Darwinism, right? And that smashes it
Exactly.
down. So if you reject random mutations, and random don't exist from that perspective, right? Randomness doesn't exist, then it just destroys their story entirely.
Can I say something? Like, I bring any atheist scientist here to argue with me on this point, please. I ask anybody, and I'm not the type of guy. I'm not a vicious guy. I'm not a type of guy. I don't want to insult people. I just want to have an exchange of ideas. I'm not angry with anybody. If you want to be atheist to me, that's your business. That's your business. I have no prejudice against you. But what I'm gonna ask them this: randomness is a rejection of Newton. Determinism flies in the face of randomness. If determinism is true, if Newton is correct, if science is true, then randomness is not true. Once you say random, once you bring in randomness, you're rejecting Newton. And if you don't understand that, you don't understand, with all due respect, you don't understand determinism, and you need to really understand determinism, because I've met very few people who truly understand what determinism is. Now, when they told Einstein about quantum physics, he says God doesn't play dice with the universe. Why? Because he understands determinism. You're rejecting Newton. How dare you reject Newton? How dare you? And he was taken aback by it. You cannot reject Newton. If you ask me to choose between Newton and Darwin, I would take Newton. Okay, because Darwin is nested in Newtonian mechanics. Newtonian mechanics came first. Darwinism only starts when life is on Earth.
Yep.
Newton's laws are before life. Okay, so don't tell me Darwinism can outweigh Newtonian mechanics. I'm telling you, I cannot accept randomness because I cannot reject Newton. Newton has to be part of the party. He has to be with us. He's got to be with us until somebody debunks it completely. Okay. So we cannot reject Newtonianism. Remember the catapult experiment?
Yep.
This is a very important thing to address. You know, and I don't see any atheists coming to address this topic either.
No, they don't. But also they don't understand that we're not just bringing in philosophical nuances just to sound smart or just to muddy the waters. No, this is a real problem. That if you are going to make a claim, which, by the way, the most prestigious collection of evolutionary ideas in one volume is the book known as The Structure of Evolutionary Theory by Stephen Jay Gould. And you know, Gould is well known. He's a Harvard evolutionary biologist, passed away some years ago. So one of the things that he clearly writes, right, even though he's this brilliant Darwinian mind, is, well, you remember back in the days we had those VHS tapes, right? Black ones.
Yes.
And then you put it in the tape recorder and it make the sound, and you if you want to play something back, you'd have to wait like that, yeah. So what he said is, look, life is like that tape, and when you press rewind and you press play on the VHS, you'll never get the same story again. So he said, when you go back to the point of abiogenesis and you replay it, you'll never get humans. You'll get a completely different evolutionary trajectory, things stranger than dinosaurs or whatever. Then you go back and you do it again. So you get this infinite number of trajectories which are totally and utterly divergent, right? And he and others see this as quite important from a theological perspective, because the whole idea behind Judeo-Christian and Islamic worldviews, any theistic type of worldview, is the fact that human beings are exceptional and we're special and there's something about us, right? This evolutionary paradigm makes us purely arbitrary, that we're just an arbitrary byproduct of nature. However, Firas, if what you're saying is correct and randomness does not exist, that means humans were decreed from the very beginning.
Agreed.
That really is a way of undermining their entire evolution.
100%. Listen, he's wrong about that, by the way. Laplace would tell him he's wrong. Newton would tell him he's wrong. Ghazali would tell him he's wrong. If I rewind the clock still ticks exactly the way it's supposed to be. If I had a perfect control, we'd have this exact universe again. He's just thinking, hey, I've never seen a perfect control. We're not asking you if you can get a perfect control. We're saying if you did recreate the universe exactly, if you rewinded it exactly, then we would have the exact same universe again. He's completely wrong. He's saying there's a woo, he's appealing to some magic in there's no magic. Listen, the causal chain is complete. We can predict where billiard balls are going to fly. If you give us the velocity of the first billiard ball, we can tell you where the next ones are going to be. Of course, we need a divine calculator because we would have to round up the numbers. So there would be a margin of error. But we're saying, look, this is what he's doing. Okay. What he's telling you is, look, here's how I see the world. And the way I see the world is true. He's wrong about that. If two people look at the world, one person of an inferior intellect and one person of a higher intellect, the person of a higher intellect is seeing more of the truth. A person with a perfect intellect, Laplace says, if you had the intellect of God, now you could finally see the truth. And the world would never appear random to you. Everything would be, there would be no twists and turns in the story. You would know it. You would see the story coming a mile away. You know, this is explicit in the Quran. God says, I know what's behind you, what's ahead of you.
Allahu Akbar.
God knows the entire causal chain.
Allahu Akbar.
You are one hair in the causal chain. Okay, the author of the Quran says the first creation was the pen. Now, if you want to take it literal, you can. Ghazali would take it literal and metaphorical. He would say, look, the pen is basically the script. Before you write a movie, you write a script. Everything that's going to happen is known. It's maktub. The Quran is deterministic. The world has been determined. Now, of course, I believe in free will. One day we should do an episode on free will. Why do I also believe in free will? Okay, and this is a very interesting topic. It's not that complicated, but it's not that simple. And I think it deserves its own episode. But the world is deterministic. Anything outside of determinism, now you're appealing to magic. You're appealing to some other force that we can't put in a test tube. You're being unscientific, unfortunately. You're being superstitious now. And this is a higher level of skepticism than your average scientist.
Yeah,
it's a higher level of skepticism.
And this is where I want to bring in that discussion that you had with Joe Rogan, right? So in a very polite way, you were basically trying to deconstruct his view of science. So his view of science as being something which is certain, something which doesn't have these gray areas or these woo-woos in there. It's all very clear. You know, you're giving him the example, I believe, of flipping a coin and a butterfly and how all basically you went right down to the core of what science is about, induction, and then basically tried to show him that it's not the way that you actually think it is, and it's not as certain as the way that you think it is. Now, before we get into that conversation, because I think one of the frustrating things about watching that interview is because it was such a deep philosophical topic and you had a very limited amount of time and you did your best to try and explain it, I felt a lot of people, they just didn't actually understand it, even though I understood it clearly. I agreed with it totally, and I think any philosopher would have got it. But I think one of the things which resisted people, which made people resist accepting what you were saying, is not because you weren't lucid enough, was simply because the idea that you were putting forward was literally going to rock and rattle the worldview of a lot of people. Right. And I felt a lot of that resistance.
But I just want to say something. I did not make up anything I said in that video. That's British empiricism. Like, if you're a Westerner, go study British empiricism. I went to university. That's what they taught me. That's what they proved to me. And if you study in Islam, they had the exact same conversation. Actually, before the European Enlightenment, the Muslims had the same conversation. And to a lesser extent, the Greeks also had that conversation. I believe there are other civilizations that had it before, because they all had philosophers, which don't have records of them. Okay, but there were always rational thinkers in history, and people observing the cycle in the world around us. The Quran is constantly telling you to observe the cycle around the world. How do you know this cycle? Why do you expect a ordered egg? Why? Well, you know what? It has to do with the past. You've observed this cycle, so you think they're going to be perfectly ordered eggs in the future. But what created this order? Why does matter behave in this way? You have to keep reducing it back until you come to a force. You come to this undeniable force. There is a force, not the after the fact force, your imagination, nature. Not after the fact, before the fact. What created the cycle? So the Quran's asking me constantly to meditate on the cycle that you witness in the universe. Okay, which is a very important subject we should elaborate later on. But everything I said on that podcast, I thought was basic. You know what? I'll tell you. I thought he had interviewed a lot of philosophers, which I didn't really listen to much of his podcasts in the past. Okay, I maybe listened to a few episodes, but I know he's had thinkers on. So I thought he's already heard maybe. So I was just bringing up a topic. Maybe we can bounce off ideas, but I didn't realize it was totally new to him. So then I kind of find myself in a way that I have to re-explain the root cause of what I'm saying. But nothing I said in that podcast is outside of academia. It's all written already. The greatest thinkers in history wrote, believed, or commented on these ideas. There's not a single thing I said that, hey, you know what? I'm an MMA coach and I'm going to do some bro science, some bro philosophy. No. Listen, I went to university. Okay. I have a bachelor's in philosophy. I wrote essays on this. I've been cross-examined on my understanding of these ideas. I've been studying philosophy for over 20 years. I can guarantee you that exactly what I said is British empiricism, Islamic philosophy, and Greek philosophy. They've all commented on this.
And
There's always two opinions to every position, but definitely it's a very highly held opinion in philosophy. Highly held.
in fact, what I found, because it was quite simple as well, what I found is that you could have actually, and there was times where I thought you were gonna ratchet it up in terms of gears, but you didn't. You tried to just keep him with you. But you could have just gone gung ho and said, well, to be fair, pick up any book on philosophy of science, you'll find problem of induction, like you said, problem of causation, problem of theory latedness, problem of unconceived alternatives, problems of underdetermination, go on and on and on. You could have just bombarded him, but you just stuck to one point, because I think that point was enough. But I think the core of the issue that I felt, because I did a three series part breakdown of that conversation. I did actually. It was about 4 hours, but then the problem with YouTube. YouTube asked me to basically take it down. There's some problems.
Really? Because you used his clips?
Because I was playing it and then I was talking over it. And the thing is, I actually watched the entire thing and played it. But I didn't play I didn't play it all in one go. I broke it down into roughly 3-4 hour segments. But because I played the entire thing, they didn't like it, because you're only allowed to use certain clips. But nonetheless, one thing I really did understand in terms of this conversation, what was happening, he represents the views, I believe, of a lot of people, which is that no, religion we left a long time ago, that's gone, right? Which is why a lot of the guests you see on his show, you can see they're actually not like a representation of everyone in academia. It's actually people with certain types of views.
Exactly.
And then secondly, there was this thing, it was almost like for the first time, you get a missionary that's come out of Utah, they're Mormon, and for the very first time they meet you, and you're basically telling them, you do realize the Bible wasn't like, Jesus wasn't walking around with the King James version. Like, you're literally rocking someone's worldview. And I felt that. Because I think that's what people are looking for. Everyone wants certainty. And if they can't,
to be honest with you, that wasn't my intention. My intention was,
I know.
I wanted to ask him what's his definition of truth, because what I remember now, you're jogging my memory. He was talking about somebody who massaged him and said, "Look, there's chakras." And I remembered the podcast between two of his friends, one Sam Harris and one Peterson, which I just did actually. I just did for the first time a reaction video to that, explaining my understanding of what they're saying. And I want to say, look, what's the definition of truth? Because before you say the guy's out to lunch, which I agree with you, is out to lunch, we have to first define truth. And he was like, oh, yeah, I heard that conversation between Sam Harris and Peterson, and there's a lot of blowback from that conversation. So I think it kind of spun us out a little bit. But I was going to get to a very simple definition of truth, because I don't want to get into it now, but there are theories of the definition of truth. What is true? There are actual, the greatest minds have tried to tackle this problem. What does it mean when something is actually true, correct? Now, I was just trying to get to a quick and easy definition, and then it kind of derailed to all that, because the truth of the matter is, I didn't think I'd have to go back and explain the problem of causation or the problem of induction. I thought it was already understood, but that was my fault, because I've been doing it for so long that for me it was simple, but it's not simple to a person who's just learning it. It's like anything. If you teach me piano, I'm going to be lost totally. If you teach me anything, if you teach me mathematics, you take me back to high school. I haven't done math in forever. I'm helping my kids now with math, and I have to go watch YouTube videos on tutorials on how to do them. I've done it. I've done it for years. I have to jog my memory. Imagine you've never done it. Of course, I just kind of, I should have started with something simpler.
Yeah, I mean, I think one takeaway lesson from that conversation definitely is how much we assume people know, because I've seen him a lot in terms of bringing on scientists and bringing on other sort of thinkers, and for example, you'll find quite popular people on his streams. So you would think, okay, you know what? On the bare minimum, he would know there is no such thing as the scientific method, because there's many different methods, right?
Right.
He would know that, in fact, science doesn't give certainty, and it has these areas, right? He would know, and something which we just take for granted, which is that science branched off from philosophies. Even Darwin wasn't actually called a scientist.
Science is not absolute, period. It's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
absolute. It doesn't tell us everything about nature. It doesn't tell us everything about existence. It doesn't tell us everything about everything there is to know. But I feel like the new generations are that's being rammed down their throat.
Yeah.
There's no room anymore for subjectivity. There's no room anymore for contemplation. There's no room anymore for logic. Almost, it has to be proven in a lab. We can't have philosophy anymore, which I think is totally wrong. I think it's part of the truth. I think it's part of what we have to do. Like, let me give you a for instance. Okay, let me give you a for instance. Are you in the mood for another thought experiment?
I always am.
Okay, good. Let's talk about Democritus. Okay, this is probably the ultimate narrative in philosophy. The ultimate narrative. Excuse me, in science. He was the first man to say atom in the void, which today they still believe. And most of them, maybe not atom. Now they'll use elementary particles. But he said, look, see this phone here? Imagine you're seeing this thing for the first time. Just go blank slate, okay? And I take this phone apart. I take two pieces apart. And you're looking at these two pieces. They were once whole, and I took them apart. And you're like, wait a second, look at this piece here. I can also take this piece apart. So you're taking the phone apart, you're taking apart the components. You're removing the glass, you look inside, you see all these components. And you start, every component is made of components. Democritus said, oh my goodness, I have to keep reducing the components all the way down till I get to one component is irreducible. Hence the name atom.
Yeah.
Now, did Democritus ever hold an atom in his hand? Never. He theorized it. He said, if there's no such thing as this atom, this one particular, there could never be this phone. We'd be in infinite regress. We'd be going forever. It would have never came to be. The phone, any object, okay? It could be a car. But imagine a car. How many pieces does a car have? Well, take apart all its pieces. Those pieces, even the bolts, are made of pieces. They're made of atoms of, or what he would say, material, metal material, binded together somehow. Everything is made of something binded. Well, he says there must be something that is not binded. Now, this was not something he looked in a test tube and he saw an atom. No, this is something he imagined. He imagined something in the mind. This is, in my opinion, it's a deity. He believes in the void and the atom. Now, later on in the 70s, or I can't remember even what year, there was a time where they believe you cannot split the atom, and then they split the atom. But what does that mean? Does that mean that the new stuff we found is what we should really be calling the atom? Because according to Democritus' definition, the atom cannot be split. But today they say they split the atom.
Yeah.
So do we have to redefine what is an atom? Or do we say that atoms can be split and Democritus was wrong?
Well, this is where, in his defense, we have to look at what he's trying to say. He's essentially trying to say that there is something that is indivisible from which everything else is built. Likewise, I mean, if you were to try and justify everything, you'd not know anything. You'd have to start somewhere. So he would say, well, this idea that, we have subatomic particles and whatever's going on in quantum mechanics and whatnot, he'd say, well, that's a straw man of my argument. I never said, these things don't exist. I just said, ultimately, there'll be something. And he called
exactly. So what we call the atom and they split, he would say, look, you didn't go far enough. There's something else.
Yeah.
Now, look, I'm not an expert in these things, but they say, string theory, it's vibration. I believe that when you're going to keep reducing, you're going to find a mist. I don't believe, personally, I don't agree with Democritus. I don't believe there's actually a hard thing out there. There's actually a one piece out there. I don't believe in that. I believe that it's all vapor. Like if, for instance, if you were in a dream, you wouldn't say, look, this thing is actually out there, concrete. No. Concrete is in the mind. It's all sensation in the mind. Because, we always have this dichotomy between objective and subjective. Ultimately, we can make everything subjective. If you think hard enough about it, everything is subjective except one thing only. And in an Islamic worldview, that's God. Only God is purely objective. God exists out there in a way that nothing else exists. وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٌ. Make no mistake about it. God, this is Ghazali. This is the Wasilin. If you have understood Ghazali, he will call you, you're the Wasilin. You've arrived. See, if you look at Aristotle, Aristotle said there's the unmoved mover. What's the unmoved mover? Well, he believed in a god. He moved everything and nobody moved him. He's the start of it all, because if somebody moved him, we'd have to regress even further. Avicenna came along and said, no, God gave existence to the unmoved mover. God is not in the causal chain. God is not in the causal chain. God says be and it is. It says be. He created the causal chain, but he didn't physically touch the causal chain. So Avicenna regressed one step further. Avicenna his view was seen as superior to Aristotle's in Ghazali's eyes. Ghazali went even one step further. He said, look, God exists uniquely. Everything else is metaphor and vapor. Now, let me explain to you what that means, metaphor and vapor. We're like those collective knives we talked about earlier. Human beings were in flux. Heraclius was right about human beings. Human beings were constantly in flux. And there was never a human being that was unchanging. Even Adam alayhi salam, when he was created, he was already in decay.
Yeah.
He was in flux. Only God is never changing. Yeah. Only God is truly objective. So Ghazali was looking for something that was perfectly objective, and he could only find it in one place. And that has a lot to do with that point of awareness I was talking to you about. You know, Rumi said it best. Rumi said it beautifully. He said, look, you're not a drop in an ocean. People always say, look at the universe, how vast it is. We're just like a speck of dust in this massive universe. In a way, you're correct. But ultimately, Rumi says, you're an ocean in a drop. The whole experience you have is nested in this one point of awareness. This one point of awareness is beyond space and time. If you study the mind, philosophers, we don't know where the mind is. If the mind is subject to time, we don't know. From Aristotle to British empiricism, we can't tell you about the mind exactly where it is. Is the mind in a different dimension? Is it because if you think the mind is behind the eyes and between the ears, no philosopher holds that belief.
Yeah, and I think this is a good point to bring in a conversation that Rupert Sheldrake has been pushing out for some time. So he's got this book called The Science Delusion, and he's speaking about the mind. And we have these assumptions in science which force us to basically limit what we think the mind is. So for example, he says these assumptions are completely unfounded, and he's not some random guy. He is an academic at Cambridge, PhD in biology, something. So he's basically giving us some very good reasons to doubt these assumptions. One of the things he actually says about the mind is about how the mind leaves and interacts with the world, right?
Isn't it amazing?
So, yeah, and he said something very interesting. He said, have you ever, basically, I'm paraphrasing what he's saying, have you ever gone down the road and then you feel someone's looking at you, you turn around and you look up at a window and the person's looking at you up there? You could have turned anywhere, but you actually turned there. And this has happened to me on the underground. This has happened to me in different places. I'm somewhere and there's 5 people, one person staring at me. I think they're staring at me. I'm reading something. I look and they look. Like he gives these types of examples to say, look, we can basically throw into the bin this idea that the physical body constrains the mind, right? This is just a pure assumption, and we've got loads of counterfactuals towards it.
Man, look, there are 3 possible worldviews. Okay, in philosophy, we argue about these 3 possible worldviews. 1, the whole world is material. 2, the whole world is just idea. That's idealism. So you have materialism and idealism, and then you have something in the middle. Dualism. There's a duality. There's material, and then there's stuff that's idea. Now, each 3 category has a version. There's countless versions of them. Okay? Materialist philosophers have to deny the mind completely. Christopher Hitchens said, I don't have a body, I am a body. This is what he says. He's a materialist philosopher. He has to say that. Because I tell you, look, I'm known for saying I don't believe in atheism. I don't believe atheists exist. 99% of them, they believe in some deity, some ghost, some magic. They make appeal to some magic. And bring me your magic. Let me cross-examine you. It's gonna disappear. And this is what the Shahada is. It's an annihilation of every single ghost in the mind until you cannot annihilate any further. And then you're faced with this one thing that's the root of all.
Isn't
it
it
one particular?
Yeah, isn't it interesting that for us, the Shahada begins with the negation?
SubhanAllah. It became, that's why Ghazali was, in my opinion, he was a true Muslim, because he doubted everything.
Allah.
But you have to be trained to doubt like this. You can't just walk around saying I doubt. And yeah, it's a very sophisticated thing. He was a born thinker. But it is the annihilation. And then you try to, that's why I say, like, atheism and Islam is very close. We deny all the gods you deny, even more, because they believe in other things like nature and gravity and randomness. And they believe in all these ghosts that no philosopher of science ever says is literal. If you think it's literal, you understand the scientific method, but you don't understand the back end of science. You didn't understand how science was created, how science was formulated. You don't have any understanding of what science means. You have not understood. You have not got to the level of a David Hume, let's say. You have not understand the workings. Okay, so one day we could talk about this. And you know what? If anybody out there would like to have a conversation about this, I would really engage with you, because I'll tell you why. If you could disprove what I'm saying right now, man, let's write books about it. We'll become famous, because this would be new to philosophy. It would be a new modern age in philosophy. Okay, so like I was saying, yes, it starts with a negation of everything, and then there's Allah. God is unnegatable. As a matter of fact, Ghazali realized that he's the only objective thing. Now, this is quite a long journey, but he does it beautifully in one of his books. Okay, and there was something else I wanted to refer to. Oh yes, Christopher Hitchens. He says, I don't have a body. I am the body. Why does he say that? He's not saying, look, I'm a ghost in a machine. I'm a ghost in trap. No, I am the body. That's what I am. Okay, there's so many great rebuttals to this, but David Berlinski said it beautifully. Dave Berlinski said, look, when he died, he didn't survive his death. Meaning, when he died, something's missing. We no longer say, that's Christopher Hitchens, but there's his body. Put it in the refrigerator. You can keep it from decomposing. When he died, why did something change? Why isn't he still there? Why isn't that still Christopher Hitchens? Christopher Hitchens is still there. If he is a body, and he doesn't have a body, like he says, there's a distinction here with a difference. He's saying, I don't have a body. I am a body. Well, you know what? When you died, we didn't say Christopher Hitchens is still with us. We say, no, he's departed. He's gone. But why are we saying that? What's missing in that formula? The flesh and bones, the stick and stones, the materials, all there, my friend. Freeze it. Put it in a cryogenesis. He lived forever. Nobody would say he's still alive. Everybody would say, look, that thing, that special thing in him is gone. It has dispersed. The machine is still there, but that essence is gone, my friend. That's just a lump of flesh. It is no longer Christopher Hitchens. And you know what? Dave Berlinski actually says, he spoke to him directly, and he told him, if you are just body, what's going to happen to you when you die? How do you distinguish when you die? When do you die? When your body's completely decomposed and eaten by worms? No, you died a long time ago, my friend. Something is distinct and different. He's basically saying, look, I'm a walking zombie. He has to deny qualia. He has to deny the first person experience. Why? Because materialism has no way to compute or factor in the first person experience. Now, I really believe the Quran really addresses this perfectly, because a true atheist has to deny, to be consistent with his worldview. And Daniel Dennett does it in Consciousness Explained, which philosophers we chuckle at. All due respect to Mr. Dennett. Nobody thinks he wrote anything that makes sense. All philosophers, we chop them up, man. It's just consciousness denied. His book should be called Consciousness Denied.
Consciousness Explained Away.
John Searle asked him, so you use your mind to convince yourself the mind doesn't exist? It's a self-defeating position. They believe in the test tube so much, they're ready to refute, they're ready to reject reason. If it doesn't go in the test tube, my friend, I reject it. But you're rejecting reason because we have ample evidence of the mind that exists. Okay, so here's what I mean by that. Okay, Leibniz wrote certain rules to logic. Okay? Leibniz, rule number one. It's not gonna sound super innovative, but believe me, this was genius. Leibniz said something purely. Logicians, we love Leibniz. We think, wow, he made logic so powerful. And you know what rule number one is? Rule number one is, if everything I could say about A, I can say also about B, then A and B are one and the same thing. That was rule number one. Everything that I can say about A, if I can say everything about A, all the comments I can make about A, I can also make about B. A and B are one and the same. That's rule number one. Now, let me tell you something. That's over 2,000 years after Aristotle. We were blown away. Philosophers were like, wow, this guy's a genius. That's just rule number one, by the way. He solved so many problems by organizing our thoughts. It might seem lame to you guys out there, but believe me, this is one of the smartest human beings ever. Rule number one of reason should be, if everything you could say about A, you can say about B, A and B are one and the same thing.
Yeah.
Now, when Christopher Hitchens died, we say, everything we say about his body, we cannot say about his mind. His mind is no longer here. His body is still here. Therefore, they're not one and the same. He's trying to say in his worldview, this mind thing, it's just brain. Brain and mind are one and the same. Now, brain, I can weigh it. Brain, I can see its color. Can I say that about mind? No, you cannot. Therefore, they're not one and the same. They cannot be one and the same. They have different properties. Now, if you look at the mind, we were talking about earlier, the mind, where does it live in time and space? The mind can think about the past and it could visualize the future. As a matter of fact, we're the only creatures on Earth, and in my opinion, in history, that can imagine living forever. The mind can imagine living forever. It can imagine eternity. It can understand eternity. No animal does this in the animal kingdom. Animals don't think about, hey, am I going to die one day? They don't have any thoughts like this. That's why young kids have to understand the mind is different than the brain, but also your choices are two. There's a binary choice. It's either nihilism or God. You will never escape nihilism. I'm telling you, we've tried. We looked under every stone. Philosophers have looked under every stone. Nietzsche gave the biggest try ever. He failed. It's either nihilism, because people tell me, oh, religion's going to die one day. It's never going to die. I guarantee you, religion will never die. Even Sam Harris, the biggest atheist, he still has spiritual. I love how Jordan Peterson says, atheism with spirituality on the side. Even he says, through his philosophies, ultimately boil down to, I don't believe in any God, but there's a spirituality. Okay, let me let this Allah in. Let me let this belief in. He cannot eliminate every single belief in something. Because true atheism would have to be like Hitchens said. It would have to be, I am a body. I don't have a body. I am a body. He would have to deny qualia.
Yeah, and you know what's very interesting about what you're saying is it's not the case where they are saying, okay, so we can't reject everything, so we're going to have faith just as just a little side dish. What Sam Harris is actually saying is, and this is one of the talks that he gives to this atheist audience, he basically says, look, religious people are onto something unless we accept the reality of that experience, then we are going to be at a severe disadvantage with actually competing with them, because they would have basically monopolized this thing called spirituality. So he's not saying it's a side issue which is residual, which we haven't solved. He's saying let's drag it center stage, because this is the most important thing, because this defines us as living an enriched worldview, having an enriched worldview. So it's impossible, like you said, to actually be a total atheist, because you have to have faith.
It's impossible. It's impossible unless you do what Daniel Dennett does and you reject the unrejectable. You have a first person experience of the mind. He has to reject the mind. And then, of course, later on he writes, oh, I'm not rejecting the mind, because he got ridiculed. But then he rejects the mind again because he's such a materialist philosopher. Now, I'll tell you, the Quran has a reply to that. Hell is a reply to that. They're going to feel, look, does anybody ever deny incredible amounts of pain? Do machines feel pain? Machines don't feel pain. You're not a machine. They're saying, look, I'm just a body. I'm just material substance. I'm sticks and stones. I'm carbon. I'm just a machine. There's no difference between me and a silicone machine made of steel, oil. There's no difference. They're saying, look, it boils down to materialism. However, if he was on a hospital bed feeling agonizing pain, and I told him, look, it's all fake. You're just a machine. That's qualia. That's subjective. He would tell me, look, you're crazy. I don't care about your philosophies. I feel immediate pain. Subjectivity is true in a sense. Ultimate pain, nobody ever argues. I've never heard a single human being told me, look, I deny extreme pain as just a fictitious, it's just imagination. It's just a ghost in the mind. It's just like it's untrue. Nobody ever denies that. It's the final argument. It's the final argument. Everybody who's touched with searing, horrible pain realizes that this is true. I don't care about my philosophies no more. I don't care about mathematics. I don't care about any theorem. This is so immediate. And that's why that's why Ghazali said, ultimately, truth is intuitive.
Okay, so just before we get to that, and just hold that thought for a second. When you said something really hit me hard about people forget their philosophy, they forget all of this rationalization that they try and make to try and challenge the reality of the self, the reality that this is happening to me. Something that just came in my mind is there's this philosopher who's like over 100 years old, close to 100 years old, quite old. And he's been writing books about why we shouldn't fear death, because nothing will happen, everything's fine, it's all good. Now in his old age, when he is facing mortality, he's actually done a complete U-turn, and he's actually really not happy about it. And what's he going through? Pain. So the pain has made him realize something intuitive, which has overridden all of his philosophy. And you know what's very interesting for us about everything he's saying now? He's not using any philosophy. He's simply going by the very first real first-person pain that he's feeling, and he's using that to override all of his life's work on death being nothing, right? And that it goes to show you, like you said, the intuition beats everything.
In the end, he's going to be faced with the more amazing and beautiful your life is, the more painful death is going to be, because you have to be separated from this world. The more immediate this pain is going to be. And in the Quran it says it beautifully. When they're on the ships and they feel the ship is going to sink and they're in a storm, all of a sudden they become theistic. All of a sudden they're praying. Now they're purified. And then when you get back to land, oh no, we just lost our minds a little bit. This is what I love what Pascal says. Pascal says, every man has a God-shaped hole in his heart.
Allah.
You're born. Listen, when people ask me, why do I believe in Islam? I say, Islam is the reversion back to the natural religion I was born with. And there's a lot to be said about this.
Yeah.
When I was in the womb of my mother, I didn't know about the dichotomy of the outside world and the inner world. There's the inner world of the mind and the outside world. I didn't know any of that. All I knew was this unity, this point of awareness. And Islam points you back to the fitrah. I'm so certain of the fitrah. I don't say I believe in God. I say I know God. I don't say I see, everywhere I look, I see the face of God. This is in the Quran. Nobody should ever say this is over-exaggerated. This is true. God is so obvious. Ghazali says that's the only thing we're sure of, God. Everything else is a faith, a level of faith we believe in, including science. If science is the belief that the future will behave like the past. If I erased your memory right now, and I conducted any scientific experiment, you would have no idea what the result is going to be. Only once I reproduce that experiment several times, then you start being predictive. You start saying, look, it's going to happen again in the future because it happened in the past. It's based on our memory. It's based on the belief that the past is going to happen again in the future. This is what science boils down to, guys. Bring me any scientist and let's have a conversation and prove to me otherwise, because this is what science's job. That's science's job. Tell us what happened in the past. Let's figure out these patterns and regularities. Let's give them names for convenience, but let's not erect gods with these names. That's what we want to avoid. Yeah. As nominalists, we don't accept any gods, except of course the one particular, the one that came before it all, not the one that came after. I observe the particulars. First, you observe the miracle, and then you come up with this idea, this narrative. I'm rejecting all your narratives. You're not certain of any narratives. I'm telling you what came before. When God says he's one, God says he's unique, he's never changing. He's telling you, look, I am the particular. I am the one before all. I am objective. The author of the Quran absolutely understands reason and logic. He's telling you, the Quran is telling you God is perfectly objective. Nothing else is perfectly objective. Nothing else. There's nothing else. Find me anything in the universe that's perfectly objective. There's always a speck of subjectivity.
Yeah. And the most powerful thing from this entire sort of narrative, this narrative that we're building, is it's not just simply the case that we're building this narrative because we feel that, okay, this is comforting. We're actually building it from first principles, but then we happen to find it comforting, right? I think it's very, very important, because we keep hearing these types of ideas. Religion is the opiate of the masses, and it's just there to make you happy. Well, actually here what you're seeing is actually the opposite. You're actually seeing the likes of Imam Ghazali and others building a worldview and deconstructing all of these idols, and then finding the truth, and then the truth is liberating. Because if we really wanted to break down, and I think this is very interesting from a psychological perspective, if we really wanted a comforting faith would be everything is halal. You can get a house on mortgage. You won't have restrictions in terms of opposite genders, in terms of this, in terms of that. Everything will be halal, right? Everyone goes to paradise. Everyone's happy forever, and you could do what you like in your life, and then in the hereafter you're going to be going to heaven. That would be like everyone's happy. They're sort of just on the same sort of bandwagon. But here, the thing which is very powerful, and Imam Ghazali has some writings about this as well, in which he links these existential questions about our meaning in our existence to the real world suffering, because we know the world has a huge amount of suffering. It's very not true. And this is something I find very powerful in his writings. Maybe you can maybe feel the same thing as well. I hope I'm not reading into it, but you can see he's somebody that's not just a objective observer noting stuff. He speaks about the way that this life is, and the tests of this life, and the trials of this life, and how faith brings you out of that. You gave the example of being on the ship. There was a very interesting character that myself and Hamza Sotzes met 11 years ago. So this guy, Great Portland Street is this very prestigious place in central London. You get like really expensive medical care. This is where all these rich Arabs come and they get, treatment and stuff like this. So there was this doctor who emailed us and basically said he's interested in Islam. So we went down to meet him, have a conversation with him, whatnot. Turned out he was a militant atheist previously, and he was using up all these he's reading up a lot on philosophy and doing all these types of things, and he was really like certain about where he was. However, what happened with him is he actually fell ill. He actually got sick, and when he got sick, he actually deteriorated to the point that he was going to pass away. And when he was about to pass away, and he's in the hospital bed, and he's just dying, and his body's decaying, and it's all shutting down, and the doctors are basically telling him, like, sorry, we can't really help you. He just starts calling out to God.
SubhanAllah.
And you know what's so beautiful? He doesn't say, I rethought cosmological argument, and then
there's no narrative that captures God.
And you know what's beautiful? This is what's beautiful. When he recovered, and sorry, he said, he also made a prayer. He said to God, if you save my life, I will find the truth and I'll follow the truth. That's what he said. Okay. Then he said he came out of the hospital, his body recovered, and obviously this was like a miracle. Then he said he went back to his original thinking. He said, basically, look, the human body heals itself. What must have happened is this, and he just made a new narrative. He basically said, look, it's just it can happen, blah blah blah. Then he said, you're just lying to yourself. But of course, after this, he accepted Islam and all these things happened. But what's very powerful about this entire saga that he went through? At no point was it about all of the philosophy that he knew. It was always going back to what his heart was saying, which is, now you have to accept God. When he came out, tried to reject God, then he found out he was lying to himself. No one told him that, right? So this is what I believe a lot of people go through. That fair enough, you can try and use technical jargon and sophistry and whatnot to try and tell yourself there is no God, it's all nonsense, it's all fairy tales. But then when you get these real life scenarios, you'll go back to your default settings.
I always tell people, when I have an honest conversation with somebody, I always say, look, every human being is hypnotized. We're following a routine. It's so energy efficient to just be hypnotized. Go through your day in a routine. But then you look at the dunya and you have a moment of mindfulness where you realize, look at existence. Look what's going on in the world. And you see people walking around doing their daily daily routine. You're like, wait a second, haven't you guys seen like what? Like they're not aware of their own existence. They're just in this energy saving mode where they're going through a routine and they're talking about the most mundane things. The miracle of life is in our face, undeniable. They call it the anthropic principle. Any idea, any hypothesis you have has to include life, because life exists. It's in our face. You would have never figured out that life is possible using logic and reason. And no, this is an answer that was given to you. That's the fitra. The answer is so evident, you cannot deny it. Okay, so I like to use the robot experiment. Imagine I'm making a robot. We've talked about this before. Okay, imagine I'm making a robot. Instead of a brain, I put a computer. Instead of blood, I put oil. Instead of a heart, I put a pump. Every organ and piece of your body is replaced with some machinery.
Okay. Go ahead. So, while you continue that, I'm just going to quickly pay Maghrib and come back. But you carry on.
No. Go ahead. I'll wait for you. Put it on pause.
No. As in, you carry on with the live audience, because there's 300 something people watching.
Okay.
You carry on.
Okay, brother. Go for it.
Yeah. Or if you want, we can end it here and you can come back again. But
no, I'll do it.
Yeah, you'll carry on. Okay, that's
right. Okay, so what we're talking about is materialist philosophers. They reduce everything to physics and chemistry. Everything is physics and chemistry. Everything is a material substance. Okay, and let's say we're building this robot. We're building a robot. Instead of a brain, he has a computer. Instead of eyes, he has a camera. Instead of ears, he has a recorder. Everything is been machined. Is there a difference between him and me? Imagine they made a robot exactly like me, and he learns at the same rate as I do. He's programmed that when he feels pain, he cries, or he gives a response, a natural, what would seem as a human response. He'll say, ow. When you tell him a joke, he'll laugh. He's programmed to laugh. But what's the difference between me and him? There's an ontological difference. And I love how Thomas Huxley puts it. We talked about this in the last podcast. Thomas Huxley, an agnostic, he was also referred to as Darwin's bulldog. Okay, he heavily believed in Darwinism. He's not a theologian in any way. He says, look, the excitation of brain matter, for that to give us the mind or consciousness, would be the same as if you took a lamp, you rubbed it, and a magic genie came out. He says this. He says, look, it's the equivalent. There's an ontological difference. Ontological means it's of two different. It's a different nature. It's a different thing altogether. It's not made of the worldly objects we see around each other. All the elements, all the table of elements, carbon, metal, iron, whatever you want to come up with. So he was saying, look, this robotic machinery, this robot that I made, it's missing something. We don't know how to put our finger on it. But there's definitely something there. The mind and the brain are not equal. Because that's why when Christopher Hitchens says, I don't have a body, I am the body. He was telling us, look, I'm essentially a robot. But the robots are missing this one first-hand experience, this intuition. So John Searle does it beautifully in a Chinese room experiment. Okay, he tries to explain to you how robots are working. They work with input and output. So suppose somebody's in a room by themselves, and there's a slit in the door. You can pass messages inwards and outwards. There's a person inside that room, and you give them a Chinese letter. And let's say the Chinese letter says, good day, how are you? You slide it through the door, and he sends you back a Chinese message saying, I'm fine, thank you, and how are you? I'm very well, thank you. My name is Tim. What's your name? He receives the message on the inside, and he responds back to you. Hello, Tim. My name is John. Good day to meet you, etc., etc. And you're having this conversation with this person across this door, through passing messages through a slit, back and forth. And then one day you open the door and you realize the person inside doesn't speak Chinese. The person inside has a manual. That manual recognizes the characters, it has pictures of all the messages you give him, and it reads the messages. He has to find the characters in his book, and then the book gives him different options of how to respond, and he just selects them. He's following an algorithm. Now, when he's following an algorithm, it makes you feel like there's somebody in there with a mind. Actually, there is no mind. There's just input and output. Now, materialist philosophers say that one day, if the algorithm is super complex, super sophisticated, it could actually have the emergent property of consciousness. It'll actually, a genie will pop out of the the lamp, and we say, look, there's no genie, there's no, you can rub that lamp as much as you want, there's no genie ever popping out. That's what we're trying to say. Dualists and idealists, we're saying that'll never happen. I don't care how complex your algorithm is. The only reason you'll think there's a mind is because you are projecting your mind onto that artificial intelligence. It's a projection of the mind Kant taught us. Okay, so let's say, for instance, I fool some kids. I take a dummy, a ventriloquist dummy, and without moving my lips, I make a sound. I have a conversation with the kids, but it's really my voice projected onto the dummy. The kids might believe. I'm just giving an example, Sabur, of a ventriloquist dummy. Imagine I have an audience of children, and I make this dummy talk, and I'm projecting my voice onto the dummy. The dummy has no mind. The dummy is just a material object, and I'm projecting my voice on him. Artificial intelligence is just a projection of our mind onto those sophisticated robots. They never have mind. Why? Because mind is of an ontological difference. It's a different beast altogether. Remember what we talked about Leibniz? Everything you could say about A, you could say about B, they'd be one and the same. Philosophers have concluded a long time ago, the brain and the mind are not the same thing. The mind can live in the past and in the future. The brain cannot live in the past and the future. The brain always lives in the present. Hence, the mind. I just gave you another difference between mind and brain. If I can give you one thing different between A and B, they're not the same. By the way, guys, this is rule number one in logic. Okay, if you want to be consistent, you have to obey these rules. Yeah. Now, I'm ready to follow the reason, logic, wherever it goes. Wherever it goes. Okay, mind and brain are not the same. No problem. Now, if you're still a materialist philosopher, I'll give you the death blow to materialism right now. Let me give you the death blow. Berkeley hit materialism with a death blow. And materialism has never recovered, guys. Remember, I said there are three major worldviews. One, materialism. Two, idealism. Everything is idea. And then the harmony between the two, dualism. When we ask materialism, prove to us materialism exists out there. Because we say materialism is another ghost in the mind. We're nominalists, don't forget. You saw a car, you saw a house, you saw a tree, and you said all those things are made of something, and we're going to call that something material. But you never showed me material in a test tube. Don't forget Berkeley's triangle. All your material objects are made of subjectivity and projections of the mind. Just real quick, I'm going to remind you of Berkeley's triangle, because Berkeley beat materialism to death. No offense to materialist philosophers out there, but it never recovered from Berkeley. Berkeley says, can you picture a triangle? Remember, I talked about this on Rogan's show. I just find it such a great example. A triangle that's not blue, black, or green. Can you picture a triangle with no subjectivity at all? Just perfect objectivity. You cannot. Every triangle is either white, black, green, blue, something. And all the objective elements are in your mind. There's things you understand in the mind. They're not out there in the world per se.
Yep.
So we cannot escape this subjectivity. He's saying, look, all this matter, when you show me a particle or whatnot, all I see is color. All its objective facts are projected from my mind. Again, if you understand Kant, which is, this is Kant 101. I'm not making this up. This is not my own personal philosophy. Okay. Don't forget what Schopenhauer said about Kant. You're not a man until you've understood Kant. When you write a book, you have it proofread. One of Kant's peers, he gave it back to him half read. He said, why didn't you finish it? He said, I fear I'm going to lose my mind. He didn't finish reading Kant's work. Why? Immanuel Kant's he's gonna shake your worldview. Yeah. And if you're brave enough to follow him down the rabbit hole, well, you know what? You have to appreciate that we're not as certain about things that you think you're so certain about things. Actually, you're not. Yeah. So everything is subjective. Now we ask the materialist philosopher, prove to us that materialism is not just this ghost. Prove it. Give us concrete materialism. Well, he says, this is what they say. They say, okay, look at this physical brain. When I tinker with it, if I cut out a piece of your physical brain, it's going to alter your mind. Hence, the mind is an emergent property. Yeah. Hence, the brain is physical and the mind is mist, byproduct. Well, we have to notice a fallacy there. They're presupposing their conclusion in the first premise. They're saying that the brain is material. We're asking you, prove to us that the brain is material. He says, okay, well, look, Start with this physical brain, this material brain. I'm asking you to get to the materialism has to appear in the conclusion, not in the premise. This is philosophers, we understand this very well. This is an invalid argument. You cannot presuppose your conclusion in the first premise. Your conclusion has to be an inevitable position. So if I say all men are mortal and Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. I didn't start with Socrates is mortal, Socrates is a man, therefore all men are mortal. That's not what I said. I didn't presuppose, excuse me, I made an error there. I was talking too fast. I didn't presuppose Socrates is mortal in my first premise. If I tell you all men are mortal and Socrates is a man, if it's true that all men are mortal and Socrates belongs to that category, therefore he's also mortal. Arguments have to be structured in a valid way.
Yeah.
It might be a bit complicated to understand, but they presuppose physicality to prove physicality.
So I think one way of putting it for everybody watching is, normally what you'll find is that when materialistic atheists are going to say things like, okay, so nature is primary, and we're like, why not the mind, or sorry, why not idealism, why not dualism, or whatever? You say, well, what else is there? So what you're pointing out, and I think it's very important to point out, is it's not self-evident, and it's not something that it can fly without justification. If someone wants to say, okay, nature is all that there is, and now we're going to look at the mind, we're going to look at all these other things, your starting point is, well, first tell us, why of the three possibilities have you just stuck with one? That's what you're basically saying, aren't you?
Exactly. Why did you start with materialism? Materialism, listen, I'll be honest with you, really good philosophers, they can protect dualism. Really good idealism is considered in philosophy irrefutable. We can't prove that it's true, but we can't refute it.
Yeah.
It seems to always boil down to some type of idealism. Not me personally, I'm between the two. Like Ibn Arabi, I agree that in category, dualism is true. Meaning, I perceive an outer world and an inner world. Now I have to ask you, what's the barrier between your internal world? Let's say you imagine an apple. Is that out there in the world? No, you're going to say it's in my mind. Okay. So we know we're having this internal experience. And then there's this external world, this outside will. There's a world out there. There's a causal chain I'm observing. You know, the sun makes a puddle evaporate, then it rains. Okay, there's this outside thing going on. What is the barrier between the two? That's my question to you. What is it? What is the barrier? What is dividing these two worlds for every single person? What is dividing you?
Well, I mean, one way I guess people can try and explain this is when Kuhn speaks about paradigms, and he speaks about how paradigms, you can't actually even compare them because they're just so, everything changes from one paradigm to another. So mass changes, your definitions change, units change, everything changes. So you can't switch. It's like you know those paintings where you have like, it's either an old woman or it's like a rabbit or something like this. Yeah. So in German, the term for it is a Gestalt shift, where you literally are staring at something. You're like, okay, that's a duck. Then you're like, oh no, it's actually a rabbit. Yeah. So it's the same thing, that you're looking at data and you can't actually take both worldviews side by side and say, okay, is it idealism or is it materialism or is it dualism? You simply can't adjudicate. And so it's kind of like you have to admit that the first starting point with whatever you begin off with, that's your faith.
Well, each system has to be consistent. And it has to be at one point self-evident. It has to be self-evident. It has to boil down. The first proof has to be self-evident. You know, you've heard of Hilbert. He says, we will know, we must know, we will know. He wanted to prove that mathematics is perfectly consistent and self-evident. And you've heard of the famous theories of Gödel. He says that the inconsistency theorem, like he proved that, if you're a mathematician, explain it. I'm not a mathematician, but I've heard them explain it. It's mind-bogglingly complex, but they say, look, eventually, ultimately, mathematics, this is not my point of view, guys, this is what I'm told by these masters of mathematics, these PhDs of mathematics. They say, ultimately, mathematics is not self-evident. It doesn't prove itself. This is what they say. Okay, I can't begin to like. I've heard their arguments. I've tried to cross-examine. It's profound. They say among themselves, look, mathematics boils down to inconsistency. It's incomplete. It's incomplete. The correct word is incomplete, which is amazing because here's the thing: all narratives, Ghazali would tell you, are because Ghazali would say it could be dualism, it could be idealism. We might be in between the two. There might be one variation that's true. We can't be sure. Remember the 1001 narratives. We don't have perfect knowledge. We don't have the totality of evidence. But here's what we do have. We have this one North Star that we're certain of. We have this point of awareness, and everything, including all your narratives and all your facts and all your history and all your observations, are nested in it. It encompasses everything, and nothing encompasses it. It is the start of everything, and it is self-evident. It is true. It needs no proof. It exists. Okay, so Parmenides said it beautifully. He said we cannot talk about non-existence. It doesn't exist. It has no properties. It can't be a topic of discussion. And because there's something that always existed, because nothing can never come into existence. Okay, Aristotle said, look, think about it as potential. If something comes into existence, it always existed at least as potential. Nothing ever came into existence that didn't have the potential. So he says, at least it existed in this way. Something had to always exist. That point of awareness within us always existed. And let me tell you something, okay? This is the secret of secrets here. You didn't have to be a logician to know it. You didn't have to be a scientific genius to know it. When people are told about God, they already understood. Why? It's innate. They already understand. That's why I believe that atheism is a rejection of the ultimate proof. It's a rejection of their own awareness. Atheists that are, they're living in a type of ignorant bliss, they don't know this. But to be consistent, you have to do what Daniel Dennett did. Hitchens understood atheism. Hitchens said, look, I am a body. He had to reject qualia. He understood we cannot have la ilaha illallah. They have to stop at la ilaha. They have to stop at everything that isn't science, material. There's just atom and the void. They have to stop anywhere further. Even Sam Harris can't stop. He says, look, I love how Jordan Peterson says it. Says, oh, your atheism with spirituality on the side. He couldn't stop. His worldview screams theism. And I believe that he can become theistic later on. Like you look at Anthony Flew. I just read his book. There is a God. He was a staunch atheist. He leaves atheism. Why? Yeah. He couldn't shake the inevitable proof that's always staring at us in the face. And staring at us in the face.
What's very interesting is his own criticism, we can say, came full circle, because he wrote this very famous paper, Theology and Falsification, and he makes up this argument, death by 1,000 qualifications, right? So basically he tries to reject God by basically speaking about how people can't really define God properly, and that really what they're speaking about, they think they know what they're speaking about, but they don't really. So his entire argument is about, through elimination, we know that basically when people are referring to God, they don't really know what they're talking about. And this type of thing is a lot more complicated than the way
I would agree to a certain extent.
Yeah,
to a certain extent. Most people, they conflate God with different things. Like I don't believe a man with a long beard is standing up above a cloud. Like I don't believe in a composed God. We talked about the Abrahamic experience. I don't believe in that. Nobody believes in that. I believe in the particular God, the one God. And when we say particular, we're talking about everything in your imagination is wiped out.
And what he did is, the way he put it was not exactly like that. But for example, when you're saying, okay, God did this action, right? So God is behind this person having a son or a daughter or whatever it is. But when they say, okay, well, how is God the creator here? And then you'll always be like, well, okay, but there was a physical interaction, there was this, there was that, but then God overall is in charge. So what he was basically trying to do was stick it on the theists and say, look, you keep adding these qualifications to God to the point that God dies, right? So death by 1,000 qualifications.
How does God die?
Well,
I don't.
Well,
I'd have to.
I read it I think 10 years ago or something, what that was. So I don't remember exactly what it was, but the point I was trying to get to is it's come full circle, because now he believes in God. Well, he's passed away now, but he believes in God. When you go back to why he actually believes, you find all of those philosophical arguments and jargon that he was trying to come up with. It didn't help him in denying the inevitable. And the inevitable that he found was that there has to be a God. There literally has to be a God. And what's very important to understand here, guys, and I think his example is perfect. People say religion's opiate of the masses, religion's this for that. Look, he never accepted religion. He never accepted a hereafter. He, in fact, didn't believe in any of the additional benefits of religion. So his was purely a cold-hearted, rational acceptance of there being a God, irrespective of the benefits, which he never reaped from, because he denied all of those things about suffering and the hereafter. He denied all of that. He didn't even believe God interfered in the world. He had this sort of deistic view. So nobody can claim, oh, he felt old and he wanted to give his life meaning, because he refused meaning. He refused God's involvement, right? So I think that's also very important to understand, that you can come to a realization of God, and you can never be accused in that case, like Anthony Flew, of basically benefiting from these existential escape routes which theistic viewpoints provide.
But he died believing in a God.
Yeah, of course.
We're talking about Anthony Flew, right?
Yeah.
He died believing in God. But you know what? Like, I always ask people, like, if you don't believe in an afterlife, like, why do you believe in this life? Because you were in oblivion. You came to life. You're gonna die, and you think the cycle ends. Like, okay, the Quran says everything's going to be destroyed. The whole universe is going to be destroyed. Scientists tell us, oh, the whole universe is going to be destroyed. The whole universe eventually runs out of energy. It's going to be dead, lifeless. Okay, how does a universe behave when it's dead and lifeless? Nobody knows. We've never seen one. We've never seen what the laws of physics do. We only know about what we've observed in the past. We can only tell you what the laws of physics have done in the past, and then we can project that onto the future. You've never seen a universe in maximum entropy. You understand entropy? Remember the egg we scrambled, we broke it, we took it from order to disorder. Okay, the universe one day is going to be in mass disorder. What do you think happens when the universe is in mass disorder? Maximum entropy. You cannot destroy it any further. Guess what? It wouldn't be outside of logic that it's recreated again. Do you think maybe this is the first and only ever universe? How do you know? Now they come up with the multiverse. That's another topic for another day. Very interesting topic, actually. Because actually Ghazali talked about this. He rejected Parmenides' view of a singular universe. He said, no, there's several spheres. But we're talking about, how do you know there's no life? This life is proof of the next life. The cycle will continue. All you see in nature, what you call nature, is life and death, life and death, life and death. Why do you think the macro cycle eventually dies? This is a question Socrates asked. He says, do you think nature is so imperfect in this one way? All these microcycles are proof of the macro cycle.
Yeah.
Why do you think the macro cycle? How did we get here? He says, basically, if it wasn't a cycle, how did we get here? Life, you have to admit, life came from its opposite, non-existent, death. I don't care what you name it. Something non-living became living. That's enough proof for me. It happened in the past. I have a faith it's going to happen again in the future. And you know what? They all secretly do. They all secretly do. You cannot deny life because of what you observed in a test tube. The test tube can never capture life. It can never define life. Okay, I love what Anthony Flew does in his book. He talks about, he says a tribe. This is actually very Islamic, by the way. So I don't think he studied Islam. He has no interest in Islam or Christianity or any Abrahamic faiths.
He was a big critic all the way to his death.
Yeah, I don't think he ever understood the philosophies of Islam. I don't think he ever even touched it. Okay, he says, look, imagine you find a satellite, a primitive tribe finds a satellite phone. The scientists of the community are going to think, look, this is all there is to a phone. The voices inside are based on the numbers of this phone, the components of this phone. The scientists are able to recreate one, push numbers, and they hear different voices, and they say, look, if we break the phone, the voices disappear. Hence, the voices are an emergent property of the phone. Yeah. It's only the sages that are going to understand, no, these voices come from abroad. When you break the phone, I can bring you a new phone, and that satellite is, again, that information is relayed back to that phone. Human beings, the essence of human beings is a type of information. Now, let me give you the ship of thesis, which will be another great example of nominalism.
By the way, that's a great example.
It is a great example. It's in the Quran. You know, like I hate when I tell this to Muslims that like they reject it. I'm like, dude, it's in the Quran. You've also become materialistic. You're so bombarded with materialism all the time. You have also like, not you. I'm saying that some Muslims, they have a difficulty capturing this. In the Quran, you know, Ghazali writes about this extensively. He says, look, the ayat al-nur, Allah is a light, and the lamp reflects that light. The more pure a human being's heart, the more he reflects the light of God. So when you see somebody who's very pious, sweet, kind, he reminds you of morality. Morality reminds you of God, because there's no reason to be moral if we don't believe in God. If there's no God, you know what? It's the survival of the fittest, and I should take all your resources from you. What, you know, that's all there is. But the Quran describes the heart of man as a lamp, and God is a light within that lamp, and that lamp, it reflects the light of God as if it was a shining star, as if it was. It is not a shining star, as if it was. Life is emanated to us by God. God gives us life. So Hitchens was saying, I am a body. He's just a machine. He's rejecting God. He was a true atheist. I tell you, I meet so many people that are not true atheists. They think they're atheists. I personally have to disagree. I say, look, you have a spirituality on the side. You haven't really committed to atheism. Daniel Dennett, he committed to atheism. He rejected that thing inside us. Hitchens rejected it. That's why he went to the point of sounding ridiculous. Dave Berlitsky said to him, okay, so you're going to survive, your body's going to survive. Your body is still here. How come you're not here? How come you're not here? The flesh, the machine is still here. Where are you? There's something being projected onto. There's something outside. There's an alien, a transcendent something within us.
And even if we don't go into just the third person experience alone, if we look at intentionality, right? So intentionality is a massive problem for materialistic worldview. A good way of entering this topic is Alex Rosenberg has this book called An Atheist's Guide to Reality, right? And his book is there to convince atheists that you guys are deluded when you talk about the self, when you talk about consciousness, when you talk about right and wrong, all these things don't exist. But one of the problems that he has to deal with is, how can gray matter think about something else? How can you have a thought about something? Right? It's a very difficult thing to actually think about. So, you know, whichever way you cut the onion, you know, you come to the same sort of conclusion that the materialistic worldview is not complete. Firas, you've frozen again. There we go. Okay. So let me know what you guys think about what we've been discussing so far. Sorry, I've been neglecting the comment section because I've been so interested in this conversation that I didn't actually give it its due. Let's see him jumping back on sometime soon. I'm going for around 2 hours. There we go. There he is.
Sorry about that, guys. Computers. What can I say?
No worries. You dropped off.
Saying.
So, but before we continue, I'm going to remind you where you were. Before you continue, we've gone 2 hours. I'm good for time. I don't want to make this draining on you because you did 3 hours. No. We could come back again, maybe.
No, let's continue.
Yeah.
Let's continue, brother. Yeah, inshallah. Let's continue a little bit more.
Yeah. All right, that's cool.
So tell me. Where were we? Where are the guys in the chat here? Where are they?
Everybody in the chat.
We were talking about the cell phone.
After the cell phone, we got to aboutness, right? Then we were talking about aboutness and how. Yeah. So the example I was giving, in fact, I was talking and then you froze. So basically, the example I was giving was Alex Rosenberg's example about intentionality. Now, he's an atheist and he wants to promote atheism. And in his book, Atheist's Guide to Reality, he basically tries to tackle the atheists who don't accept the implications of atheism, such as moral nihilism, such as consciousness not existing and life being meaningless and whatnot. But one of the issues that he points out is intentionality. How can gray matter think about something? The problem of aboutness, right? It's actually very strange when you think about it.
This is what we're talking about it before. We're saying the mind can live in the past and think of the future.
Yes, exactly.
How could the brain do that? The brain cannot do this. This is exactly what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, because you'd have to. I mean, there's an emergence of states which cannot be reduced to brain activity, right? It's very interesting. You also mentioned something. I wanted to come in, but I didn't want to break your flow earlier. You mentioned human beings being species that can actually think about living forever.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting about human beings is we have self-restraint. So we're willing to give up things for the afterlife. But you find an animal, they find food, they'll go for it. They find a mate, they'll go for it. They won't have this concept of, okay, I have this concept of the hereafter, so I'm going to give up the immediate. It's very interesting that human beings, even if we're to look at ourselves as part and parcel of nature and everything is just evolved randomly, why are we willing to do exactly like you said? We can have this foresight of us living forever.
Well, I love the story of Adam. Adam was a material substance, the soil, the clay. He was formed, and then God breathes into him the ruh, this divine something, this something that is transcendent. It doesn't belong to the table of elements, and we have to grapple with that. You're born every day. It's unavoidable. It's in your face that even if somebody's a layman, when I talk to him about God, he's like, yeah, I believe you. And somebody tries to convince him God doesn't exist. He can't. It doesn't matter how logical you are. I can't reject this one thing that's in me. It's my whole world is contained within it. I can't reject it. It's so immediately obvious.
Yeah.
That I can't reject it. I don't care what narrative you give me. I don't care how many. That's why I tell people I don't believe in God. I know God. I don't. There are many things I take on authority, yes, and have a faith in them, yes, but not my belief in God. My belief in God is unshakable. For me, it's too immediate. I love the hierarchy of needs. The hierarchy of needs. Abraham Maslow.
Yeah.
He re-edited. This is amazing. People don't know this.
With self-transcendence about
the top. Originally his pyramid was a self-actualization, the top. Okay, so after you've taken care of your need to eat, shelter, food, socializing, having family, loved ones, being part of a group, okay, then you pursue your potential. Okay, so if you have the potential to be a university graduate, you exploited that potential. Okay, so that's called self-actualization. Okay, any potential you had, you exploited it and you lived life to the fullest. That's what he says was the top. And then he came back and he rewrote it. You know why? He understood that it's not fulfilling enough. It still didn't reach the top of the pyramid. What was the top of the pyramid? Now, this is your Western thinker. He's a Western thinker. He said, look, self-transcendence. I have to find that thing that is beyond me. I am not a body. There is something more to life than this body. And he found something that's alien to this world, something that is not part of the table of elements, that you know directly. He found Ghazali's nucleus, the Ghazalian nucleus. He found this one thing we call Allah, La ilaha illallah. None of this, Rumi said it best. If you don't find this one thing and you did everything else, you did nothing. And if you find this one thing and you never did anything, you did everything. This is the one most important thing. Even Sam Harris can't let go of, he can't truly embrace atheism. He's always trying to find spirituality, consciousness. He's always searching, what is this transcendent thing? Even him, he's not a real, in my opinion, he's not a true atheist. He's an arrogant, in my opinion, this is my assessment. I don't want to sound rude or anything, but I feel he's just so much ego that he can't see, he can't accept that his narratives cannot capture this transcendent thing. Sujud. Let me just say one line. Sujud, when a Muslim prays, he puts his head down. What is the significance? You're saying, look, God, you gave me the answer. I didn't figure it out. My mind was not superior to what you tattooed in my heart. That's why when you're in sujud, the mind is lower than the heart. The mind is put on the floor. My narratives didn't encompass you. I didn't figure you out. You gave me the answer and then you gave me the test. The answer was with me all along. It's too obvious. I was given a free pass. This is what submission. I gave up. You gave me the answer. I tried to figure it out on my own, my intellect. I can point to you, but I can never know about you. Okay, and I'll give you a thought experiment that highlights that well after, if you like. But go ahead.
Yeah. I've forgotten the point I was about.
It's late where you are.
So
It's late where you are a bit. No, what time is it?
No. It's not the lateness, but you spoke about. Oh yes. You were speaking earlier about Sam Harris, and then he's trying to deny this. He doesn't want to deny spirituality, but he's denying God. Something that human beings can do is that we can actually have a false positive, right? So we're looking for something, but then we find something that is, for example, in this case, we're talking about self-transcendence. Yeah. So we're looking for something that's going to fulfill our need of self-transcendence, but that doesn't mean that we find something that is that. So for example, in the same way, when we look at the other needs, we look at self-actualization. You can have false positives. You can have things which you think are going to help you with self-actualization, but they don't. They just humiliate you. So with self-transcendence, one of the things which is very interesting is that human beings, rather than getting to God, they sometimes try and find self-transcendence in nationalism, right? Or in the new religion of human rights, or in race, in some sort of group activity, because what they start seeing is that, okay, it's not just about me, it's about the group, it's about the nation, it's about
the group will live on.
Yes.
The myth will live on. The movement will live on.
Exactly. But the problem with that is that's a false positive. And the reason why it's a false positive is because those nations or those ideas or whatever the thing is that the person says, right, I'm now going to find transcendence by giving up my life for this thing, that thing never lasts.
But that's the thing. You're just moving the problem up.
Exactly.
That's not true. That's not true self-transcendence.
Exactly.
It's not the ultimate. It can't be the top of the pyramid.
It can't be, because it's not transcendent. It's temporal.
It's temporary.
Yeah, and the way I think about it is, you see, the Japanese in World War II, they got to a point where they had this belief in the emperor being a living god, dedication to Japan. So they made truly nationalism into a self-transcendent idea, that it's about the greater Japan, it's about this, it's about that. Now, I just want to highlight one of the things which I thought was really bizarre and interesting about this period of time. So people were mad crazy about defending Japan, right? So they started doing kamikaze attacks. They started just flying out and doing these things. What's very interesting is that they had this idea of a one-man submarine, right? This is like 1940s, which is amazing at that time.
Really?
Now, back then, because of technology, they couldn't basically have the sort of communication we have now, that when you're testing out a submarine, you can talk to the people above you directly. It was quite primitive technology. So the guy who designed the one-man submarine, and this would have been a devastating weapon against the Allies, right? Because then they would have these one-man submarines which would be sinking American aircraft carriers and ships, and not aircraft carriers, their navy and stuff. So what he did is, once he designed this thing and he tested it, he went underground. He went under the underwater, and when he was underwater, he noticed there was some leaks, some problems. So water started rising up in the one-man submarine. He couldn't contact the people above him to say, get me out of here. So he was going to die. But the water wasn't rushing up. It was incrementally going up. Now, in his last moment, because he was completely brainwashed with this idea of self-transcendence in Japan being the means of that, he spent the last moments of his life not praying to God, figuring out what the technical problem was, finding a place to put it which is waterproof. So when they found his dead body and they looked through the actual submarine, they found the solution to the problem, meaning he was willing to die. And in his last moments, rather than being rattled and screaming and calling out to God or whatever it is that he was going to do, he started finding a solution, which goes to show you that sacrifice for him was about self-transcendence. Well, guess what? The Japanese empire no longer exists. Vast majority of Japanese people are leftist, right?
Mhm.
They don't believe the emperor is God anymore. I've been to Japan. They've completely lost their traditional view. But at one point, that was the be all and the end all, and the reason why Japanese people were actually willing to sacrifice their lives. So true self transcendence, you will never ever find in anything except Allah, because everything else will
Tran-
fall apart.
Transcendence cannot ever decay. True
Yes.
self transcendence, true transcendence can never decay. It is not subject to decay. If it decays, is because it was based on particulars that are not transcendent. You cannot build something transcendent, eternally transcendent, by uh, particulars that are. You see, something that is transcendent has to be one. It has to be one. It can never be. It's hard to explain. I'm losing my words here, but the universal, if it is eternal,
But,
it is
but
one piece. It
it's like
has to be one.
yeah, it's like the knife example you gave. You
Exactly.
said if it's a um if it's something we want to define, then it's like it has one weight. It's one type. Do you see?
Hmm. There's only one thing that could be transcendent. There's only one. That one thing is literally a singular object, a one thing. You can call it a thing. Allah calls himself a thing in the Quran. It's a thing out there. It is immovable. It is perfect. It is forever this one way. It's not going to go through phases or whatnot. The Japanese Empire is a collective of decaying particulars. So for me, it's an idea. It's nominalism. It's a universal. It's not really transcendent for me. The government is going to decay. The Japanese empire is going to decay. It's all going to decay. So I personally, I don't view. I view it as a universal. I don't view it as transcendent.
Yeah, absolutely. And when we speak about uh, uh, transcendence, and in terms of the hierarchy of needs, there is actually evidence from anthropologists about ancient people, so not ancient people, primitive people, who actually were willing to starve to death and no longer work, and this type of thing, if the meaning of life was taken away from them.
Akid,
So human
100%.
beings always have to have this background story, this background narrative. It's all going to be all right. Something's going to happen. One thing which I often think about, and this is something which obviously on this channel I've spoken about quite a few times. I've seen on your Twitter as well, you've defended the Uyghur people in China. That when you think about this cruel barbarism that exists in this world, right? The evilness that we've seen, it happened at the time of the Prophet, it happened at the time of Moses, it's happening today with people in the world, which are deliberately, and these natural disasters are a test, but these people themselves are inflicting this deliberate pain on people. When you die, at the moment that you're actually being, like the Jews in World War II were being sent to concentration camps, the justice for them, if this world is truly atheistic and there is no God, there is no justice. It's meaningless, right? And that thought in of itself, it makes human beings sick to our very core, which is why, the most hardcore atheist in the world, regardless of what they say, and like, for example, you mentioned Dennett, you mentioned, Dawkins and others, they will never, ever give up the fight for social justice, regardless of the...
It's meaningless.
Yeah, exactly.
It's meaningless. I mean, I in Anthony Flou's book, he had a beautiful quote from Heisenberg, a beautiful quote, and it's about Heisenberg. He's talking about God and the soul, and he's saying, look, if you ever took this out of the equation, you're gonna find a fate worse than concentration camps and disease or what. Like, it's worse. That's what I was telling you earlier. Your choices are two choices. It's God or nihilism. I love another Heisenberg quote, which is amazing. He says, look, if you're drinking from the glass of science, one gulp makes you an atheist. Keep drinking. At the end of the cup, God is waiting for you.
Allahu Allahu Akbar.
When you philosophize, if you truly understand what science means, you have to start asking why these particles are moving. And you can't give me an after the fact ghost like nature. You have to tell me before. What is the force before that pushed them? What is the force before that acted upon them? And Heisenberg, obviously, I'm not an expert on Heisenberg. I haven't read his biography or anything like that. But just hearing that one quote he talked about reminds me of the Quran. It reminds me, like the Quran, it says, God is like his servant thinks of him. If you think God doesn't exist, God is evil, or you think, God is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, the most gracious, the most merciful. This is the most beautiful name of Allah. And they say, look, God doesn't exist. Okay, you know what? In the afterlife, Allah separates you. You think he doesn't exist? That's what Allah is going to give you. Allah. Heisenberg is saying, look, hell is, if you lose the soul in God, you're worse. You're going to be in a situation worse than the concentration camps. It's a great quote, actually. He's talking about it's going to be worse than what you find in a concentration camp. If you take away, he talks about, what force is making the compass point north. He's talking about if you lose that, your fate is worse than what's in the concentration camp. What's he talking about? If you're going to be separated from God, this is the worst punishment. You said there's no God, Allah is going to make that a reality for you. Hitchens said, I am a body. He's going to be separated from Allah. This is what he wished for. You wish to be with Allah. You wish to live forever. This is what you think of Allah. Allah is going to make you live forever. Allah is going to make this your reality. God is saying that to you in the Quran. Now you chose, in the Quran it says all evils that touch you, it's from you. This is free will, by the way. When we're going to talk about free will, Hitchens chose. He chose hell. He chose it. He has the free will to choose Allah or hell. There's only two choices, guys. And if there's any thinker out there that can prove me wrong, please bring your works. I got really excited. Sam Harris did a Google talk about he's going to prove morality scientifically. I got super excited. I watched the whole thing. He never did it. He never did it.
So just before an atheist strawmans what Firas is saying, because I love this guy, so I don't want someone to make a meme out of this. We're not saying that Christopher Hitchens is in hell. We're saying if somebody chooses to reject God, that is a choice they made.
Right. I will never say who's in hell, who's not in hell. But I'm likening it to Heisenberg's quote. Okay, exactly. Heisenberg is saying, look, if you lose this thing, he was talking about God and the soul, your situation is going to be a dire one, worse than a concentration camp. Now, how could you imagine something worse than a concentration camp? He's saying that Hitchinson chose nihilism. He chose nihilism. He said, I am a body. I'm rejecting it all. I'm rejecting anything that's not in the test tube, so to speak. Okay. That's free will, guys. That is free will. In Islam, we say we have free will. You choose. You choose. God is telling you in the Quran, you have free will. You choose me or you choose to go without me. That's it. You remember me, I'll remember you. This is a quote in the Quran. This is what God says to the mankind. Hitchens chose that. That was his free choice. Now, I don't believe we can, honestly, I don't believe we can judge people. His upbringing maybe had led him to a certain worldview, and maybe he's going to be forgiven. I don't know what's going to happen. God is going to judge him. What I'm saying is I'm likening it to the Heisenberg quote. Heisenberg is telling you, look, you have two choices. That's what I'm telling you also. Nietzsche was telling us, look, Europe, you're going towards nihilism. This is your future. He said, this is a quote from Nietzsche. He says, I predict the next 200 years of Europe. He predicted an atheistic movement. And guess what? You're going to have despair. There's no meaning to life. What's the point of survival and reproduction? What's the point? Your kids survive or die? What's the point? They all end up in the grave anyway. What's the point? Who cares if we harness the energy, the sun of the sun's energy? Who cares? At the end, you all end up in the grave. It was all for nothing. Build your castles as high as you want. They all end up crumbling. Nothing lasts forever. For us, that's a problem because we are the only creatures that can, psychologically, it's a problem. We're the only creatures that can see us living. We can visualize ourselves living forever.
Yeah, and what's very interesting, if an atheist really wants to say to us, you know what, guys, this is all just not making any sense. I actually do believe in this. We can simply say to them, well, that's fine. Show us exactly a consistent worldview. If you want to say atheism is a consistent worldview and your actions are in line with what you actually believe, if they actually are, and this is really like quite interesting to think about. If they actually are, then you should see a, say for example, you saw a child being run over by a bus, you would actually deep down think to yourself, there is no reason, no rhyme, no rhythm to why this happened.
It's just more matter.
It's just, yeah, you would.
Just more
Who
matter.
does that? Who
It's
does
just more
that?
matter.
Yeah.
But yet, if I make a robot that's identical to you and I destroy it, nobody says I committed murder. When we see Hitchens' lifeless body, we don't say that's Hitchens. We say he passed. What is it? But that's the machine that we call Hitchens. Why
Yeah.
do you differentiate? Why? Oh, it's no longer reproducing. So what? If I'm a human being and I reproduced, I'm not self-replicating my cells. Well, that's a function. A function now is that's how you define him. I don't define him as that. I believe Leibniz was correct. You can't say everything about everything you say about the body. You cannot say about the mind. They're two separate things.
Yeah. And what's interesting is, when we were asking atheists to live according to their own principles, if we look at the Soviet Union, right, that's when an atheist state tried to live according to its own principles of materialism and Darwinism and physicalism and whatnot. Yet what they ended up doing is, because they were channeling all of that energy of self-transcendence away from God, it just rerouted itself and found itself within the actual structures and the statues of the Soviet Union. So for example, Lenin died, and rather than burying him, they kept him there.
They try to make him a god. Pascal is right. There's a god-sized hole in every man's heart.
Yeah.
And anything you put there is no good.
Yeah,
anything you put there is no good.
And also, I found something quite interesting about contemporary China today, communist China, is people were living through dire poverty, right, previously. And through unfettered capitalism and stuff like this, and the technology they steal and all this stuff, they're doing a lot better economically than they were a few decades ago. However, amongst the middle class in China, faith is becoming fashionable. This is very interesting, right?
It's never going to go away. Faith is never going to. I don't care how many atheists write a bazillion books. It's never going to go away. You are fundamentally a point of awareness. You can never erase it. I don't care if you kill every theist in the world and you have a population of just atheists. Guess what? Guess what's going to happen? The next generations are going to start becoming religious. You can never nuke it. You can never imprison it. There's nothing you could do about it. There's just nothing you can do about it. There are only two choices. And if you found a third, tell the world, because there is no third.
We've lost Firas again. Let me add him. No, remove. Add again. MashaAllah, a lot of comments. And I can sometimes see in the comment section, people actually starting to fight with each other. I'm not sure why that happens. Maybe everyone's tired and familiarity breeds contempt. I don't know what it is. Nope, it's not working. So we'll need him to come back in again sometime. Wow, we've been going for 2.5 hours nearly. Let me know, guys, what you think. What you think about this live stream. Inshallah, I'm going to bring him back again soon. This is probably going to come to an end. It's been interesting. It's been good. I'm actually reading the comments right now. So if you guys are reading, I can actually read it. Will you make a book recommendations list? What I would say is, okay, I think Firas is back. David,
I gotta update my computer's stuff, and I don't know what, but it keeps crashing.
No worries. We're looking good in terms of what we've covered today. So the last thing you were saying is, look, they can never ever.
There'll never be a death of religion. There'll never be. I don't care how many Dawkins' books, not impressive to me, and all his rebuttals are not none of them even shakes me even a little bit, to be honest with you. Hold on, I'm having these pop-ups here telling me I have problems with my computer. Forgive me 1 second.
No worries.
I wish they taught me computers. I went to school for 20 years. I didn't learn anything about computers. Listen, religion is never going to die. There's always going to be that fitra. You're born in this, I don't care, find me the most primitive, untouched society somewhere in the jungle. They believe in deity. They believe in God. They have, maybe it's a mixed idea. Maybe they're not perfect logicians. They haven't had the Abrahamic experience. Maybe they haven't filtered. They haven't reconnected with their original innate belief.
Yeah.
But it's there, and they'll figure it out. Over time, they will figure it out. You will never get rid of the belief in God. It'll never disappear. And here's the thing. Look, this is what Leibniz said. He said it so simply. It was genius. He said, "Look, see, tell me if this is not too complicated to understand further." I like this example that Leibniz gives. Okay, he says, "Look, everything that requires an explanation, we say it's contingent in philosophy.
Yep.
Right? Everything that requires an explanation has an explanation. Now, you might not know what that explanation is, but everything that requires an explanation has one. That's it. Okay, it's not a question. That's not a question of matters of fact. It's a irrefutable logical position. If it has an explanation, if it requires an explanation, it has one. Doesn't mean we know what it is, but it has one. It's contingent. What's the one thing that doesn't require an explanation? There's only one thing, he says, and that's God. Like, you can't get around it. Everything else would require an explanation. God is the only thing that is self-evident. Atheists, the way they get around it, they say, "Oh, I don't know. I just don't know." They an appeal to ignorance. I don't know. Maybe it's something, but you don't understand. Everything that you bring to the table would be contingent. This universe didn't have to be exactly the way it is. It could have been otherwise. That means it's contingent. The only thing that is necessary, the only thing that can explain existence, according to Leibniz, and I agree with him fundamentally, it's the only stuff. It stops infinite regress. It would have to be God. There's nothing else that fits that description. Democritus' atom doesn't fit that description. Why? Because it's based on his conjuncture. If every human mind was destroyed, there would be nobody thinking about atoms. God is the only thing that supersedes every contingency. It's not contingent. God, Dawkins, he made a huge blunder. He was debating John Lennox, and he says to John Lennox, "Well, if God exists, who explains God?" Okay, this is, if you say that to any philosopher, he's gonna cringe. John Lennox is like, "What are you saying? God is self-evident. He's self-explanatory. The definition, if God was contingent, he wouldn't be God. That's the definition of God. The definition of God is that he was not created. He was eternal. That's the definition of the term." It was grade 1 level philosophy coming from Dawkins. Now, Dawkins is trained in the scientific method. Okay. He's not a dumb guy. He's a very intelligent guy, but he definitely is not a philosopher. Okay. He's definitely not a philosopher. He doesn't understand that the term God entails the answer to the question he was asking.
Yeah.
There's only one thing that can be truly self-evident.
And Allah, in the Quran, we find this throughout, that Allah mentions himself as the first and the last and the the manifest and the hidden. Like the recurring theme. What's interesting about the Quranic narrative is that every page you find you find it's about Allah, right? Mm-hmm. So you will find verses which are to do with marriage, or to do with human interaction, or to do with warfare or social structure, whatever it is. It could be anything. But then in the beginning of the surah, you'll find the praise of Allah. In the end of the surah, you're going to find the praise of Allah. In between, you're going to find Allah is there. So in a way, the way we can sort of summarize it is, one of the messages of the Quran is that Allah is trying to get us to understand, if you peel away this material world at any point, you'll see Allah. Literally,
the death of all paradigms is the Shahada.
Yeah.
All paradigms, none of them encompass Allah. That's why we do sujood. God gave us the answer, and now we try to encompass him with our minds. We're not worthy. This is this Islamic position. We're not worthy. The answer was given to us. It wasn't your logicians. This is, no logician is gonna capture God with his logic. You can point to God with your logic. That's why Ibn Arabi says you learn from a dead man, like a dead man to a dead man. You learn all the facts about the world. Min al-mayyit lal-mayyit. Like, I give you H2O. I give you all the facts about. You're learning like a robot, but a robot is dead. A robot doesn't have life. That's not the taste of life. It's not. Thinking robotically is part of the human experience. Logic is a beautiful thing, but it doesn't encompass that one ingredient that we all carry within us. The difference between a machine and a human being, there will always be a difference. I don't care how sophisticated Siri gets, the little robot, the artificial. I don't care how sophisticated she gets. She's just an algorithm. And people will project their minds onto the algorithm, but she's never alive. She never has that one component that we all share. In the Quran, in 3 places in the Quran, God says he made all mankind of one soul. You were talking about earlier, like, I have this weird connection. Yes, I truly believe that we all reflect one soul. We do. All human beings have a connection with one another. When we see each other, we're like, look, I see in you what I am experiencing within myself. There's this thing, like William Dudley says, we're all made of the same inner stuff. There's a connection between us all. What is that connection? There's nothing in the table of elements. And we can't hide behind complexity. We can't say that one day we're going to make Siri so complex that she's going to be she's going to have an actual mind. Like, Turing says this. He says, if I can make artificial intelligence that fools you into thinking you're talking to a human being, then that is conscious. So he's saying, look, if I can make it appear like consciousness, I fool you, it's conscious. So if I give him a fake diamond, he's going to say it's a diamond. Why? I fooled you. You think it's a diamond? He drew a line in the sand, but that line is arbitrary. He was just giving us a benchmark. Artificial intelligence will never have a mind. Never.
Well, it's also another way of thinking about it is all of us have experienced times where you're either in a hotel, you're traveling somewhere, your friends and family are away somewhere, so you get to spend a lot of time around machines, around a TV, around a mobile phone, around these types. And even during the coronavirus, we've all felt this, right? How complete do you feel with that connection? I mean, to be honest, when I'm talking to you, Firas, or you're talking to me, we're trying to, interact with each other and speak to each other, communicate on something that we like. However, when you're speaking to a large group of people within your social network, sometimes they're saying things that are totally boring. You're like, I can't be bothered with this and whatnot. The TV is a lot more controllable. You can actually go from one channel to another, watch whatever the heck you want. Yet human beings, we don't want that. We want that human connection.
Absolutely.
Well, the machine, I was watching this video where, Allahu Akbar, like robots are getting very human-like now, right?
Mm-hmm.
But even if you manage to get a human being which is like a real human in terms of the way it looks, right? And also that it has all of these complex mechanisms. I mean, the way machine learning is with artificial intelligence is we could actually say you, Firas, right? Somebody could take all of your videos, all of your discussions, mimic it all, give it to a robot to the point that, because let's be honest, everything that you're saying now, you've probably reflected about it in your mind anyway at some point. So we could take all of your past life and we could download it onto a computer so that we can have another robotic Firas. And at any point, if I said something, you would tell me the same thing you're saying to me now, right? Mm-hmm. But that wouldn't mean that I would value that thing more than the real person. Do you see? So we innately know there's something more than the physical.
Think about a crowd of people. Imagine a crowd of people, they witness a heroic something. Let's say let's say 100 people are witnessing somebody save somebody from a burning building, let's say. And we all start clapping. We're all having the same internal experience. We now are mirroring our internal states. Let's say you're all listening to the same something, or you all heard the same funny joke and you're all laughing at the same time. All of a sudden now the channel within is similar. If you look at Mecca, that's what Mecca is doing. Everybody from around the world is praying in unison. You are now channeled into the same. You have within you in common with every human being this internal stuff. Let's call it stuff, okay? Because it's transcendent. We can't label it. This harmonious experience between us all is what humanity is. We're having this human experience. You and me right now, we're on the same channel. Whether you're laughing at a joke or whether you're witnessing something heroic, we're all experiencing the same emotion, the same internal state. Because I could see you down the street. I don't know what internal state you are. We're not mirroring our internal states right now. But when we are mirroring our internal states, I can no longer see you as a machine. I have to see you as something else. Your internal state, I know, is similar to mine, or I feel it's the same as mine. And I feel I'm having this experience that's beyond the test tool, beyond machinery, beyond this. Robots will never have this. You know, if you look at Mecca, when I look at Mecca, I see all these people praying. I see all these human beings having the same internal experience all at once. And I say that's the most human thing I've ever seen. It's unexplainable unless you've experienced it. It's everybody on the same channel at the same time, on the same level. And that's the most human, because if you weren't human, you could never know anything about this. You could never have this experience. You know, when a crowd of people are on the same channel, they feel this immense joy, don't they? People at a concert, you see how happy they are. Why? They all have in common this song that they like. They're all in the same channel within their minds. There's a frequency going on that's mirroring one another. We've all had this experience with other people, right? You have this experience, you know, with your family members when you're sitting around the table. We're all happy to be here. Everybody's on the same channel. And that human experience cannot be quantified. It cannot be reduced down to chemicals, physics and chemistry. It cannot. And every human being who's had that experience has to say that, has to admit that. Because if you deny it, then what's the difference if I move my coffee mug from one part of the table to the other, or if I remove your head from your shoulders? What's the difference? To a true atheist materialist, he would have to admit, look, that's just material displaced. I cannot attribute anything further than material physics and chemistry to that displacement of material.
Yeah.
That would be a true atheist. That would be somebody I would say, you know what? I don't think that guy has... I think I would say that guy's a psychopath, to be honest with you.
Well, you know, if we look at Nietzsche, he went mad. Yes, you went mad.
He did go mad.
Yeah, because
some people are going to say it's the syphilis, but it's, you know, some psychologists will say every ailment is a manifestation of some psychological effect. So even if your back hurts, some psychologists will say, oh, that's just because you don't have support. It has nothing to do with your eroding spine. There is, listen, I don't believe in that personally, but there is some truth to that. Like, did he go mad because of a virus, or was he given a virus because of his, you know, of the way? These are questions that too long for this channel, but one day we can discuss that. I mean, did he get what he deserves? Is that perfect justice? Because he claimed God is dead. He claimed it, and what he meant by that is complex, but we'll leave that for another day.
What's interesting is, you know, him proudly proclaiming there is no God. God is dead in the madman parable of his, right? And he himself goes mad. So the parable is about the madman.
But he tried to say, oh, we're going to replace this God-sized hole in your heart with the Ubermensch. You are going to be the center of your universe. You are going to laugh when you look into the abyss. What is the abyss? The abyss is to look into the world and to see that the life has no meaning. No, don't worry about it. You're going to laugh. You're going to be such an Ubermensch. You're going to laugh. Well, guess what? Nobody laughed. Nobody laughs. I've never seen a nihilist that is laughing or being happy. Okay, if you could be a naive atheist, but it's going to hit you quick near the end of your life. It's going to hit you quick. It's going to hit you hard. There's two options, guys. And if somebody has a third, bring it to the table. Bring it. Let's cross-examine it.
When it comes, now we're getting into the implications, right? So we're speaking about, okay, so if you're an atheist, this is what this is how you should act. What I find is when it comes to the existence of God, the atheist tries to at least mimic to the best of their ability what they should be saying. So I'm not saying there's no God, but I'm saying most likely there isn't a God, there isn't sufficient proof, blah, blah, blah. When it comes to the implications of atheism, they never act the way an atheist should act. So they always say things like, no, you're misrepresenting the atheist worldview. No, that's a straw man. No, that's not true. We can believe in this. We can believe in that. But really and truly, when you break down the atheist worldview from an implications perspective, there is no hope, there is no justice, there is no right, there is no ultimate meaning, there is no purpose. Everything is so dark and cold. And you know, maybe this is something we need to be a bit careful of. I used to make a lot of videos with this brother, mashallah, I still work with him, Yusuf Ponders. He's done a lot of work on nihilism and stuff. And he used to be a nihilist, used to be an atheist. And one of the things I found is, even when I was talking to him a lot about atheism and nihilism, it's starting to get me depressed. And I was starting to feel depressed for them, even though I didn't believe this nonsense. But deep down, I actually thought, how terrible would it be if somebody actually believed this? If they actually believed that this life is all that there is and everything is meaningless, and whatever happened to you, you'll never have any solace in anything.
But my question to them is always, how did you come to this life? How did you come? Oh, this process, that process. Okay, you're so sure of that? You think you've understood nature? Or do you believe that the world out there is far more complex? That we like Einstein would tell you, we knew less than a speck of what's out there, right? He's probably arguably one of the most intelligent men in history. And he's telling you, look, we know so little. So you're not sure. I'm not sure of how we came to be. Okay, we don't know. But we came to be. That's the ultimate proof. You're here. And I believe, like I came here, I'm going to come again in the future. This is the promise in the Quran. This is what you should have faith in. Like you came here, you're going to come again. Do you think that this cycle, remember the cycle we're talking about, there's one way to get a whole egg. There's just one way. There's an incredible amount of ways it could be scrambled. Yet we see order over and over again. And then they're going to start, talking about the laws of nature. Philosophers have understood that the laws of nature are projections of the mind. Don't forget Immanuel Kant, and before him, and Ghazali. Don't forget, we are when you observe nature, you're also projecting your mind onto nature. Cause and effect is never put into a test tube. It's names we give patterns and regularities. These patterns and regularities, even Heisenberg, I was reading his quotes, he's saying, look at these regularities. Where do you think the driving force comes from? Where does it come from? You give me a woo word like nature. Nature means nothing to me. That word means nothing. That's just a name for a collective of particulars. What is moving these things? In my opinion, it has to be God. There's no other candidate. There is a force in the world. There is a power. I can't deny there's power. Every time I try to attribute it to something, I find that thing is a mist. But something has to be attributed to it. There has to be something out there. And it has to be before the cycle, before we observe. Because you have to understand, the cycle of nature, I love what Einstein calls it. He called, again, this is Anthony Flew, he quotes Einstein. He says, Einstein called it reason incarnated. And he talks about how Dawkins misrepresents Einstein's view on God. He says, Max Jammer, again, I just recently bought his book. I haven't read it yet. He wrote a book about Einstein and religion. And Max Jammer saying, look, here's Einstein's views on religion. And Dawkins misquotes him. Okay, Jammer wrote before, but Anthony Flew is telling you that Dawkins misquotes Max Jammer's work. Okay, so Einstein's friend is being misquoted by Dawkins. Here's the full quote, and if you quote it fully, it destroys Dawkins' position. Okay, Einstein believed in a God, not a personal God per se, but he believed in a God. Okay, and not a pantheistic God. Again, this is all stuff that, according to Anthony Flew, is misattributed to Einstein. And I'm looking forward to reading Max Jammer's work. I haven't gotten to it yet, but regardless, there's a rationality in science. When a scientist goes to study nature, he's presupposing, again, this is Kant, that nature is rational. Yes. We don't live in a random universe. A random universe, things would blink in and out of existence. The cycle would be different every time. Yet the world we live in, the cycle is perfectly
Consistent.
consistent. Why is the cycle perfectly consistent when there's so many more ways for an egg to be organized? Why is this cycle organizing this egg in this one particular way every time when matter can be arranged in a whole infinite amount of ways? Why is this being done over and over again? And forget the egg. We can do the cycle applies to everything in nature, everything in the world around us. Why is the cycle perfectly predictable? If you lived in a random world, you would see a different type of egg every time. The world would just be, if there was a force out there that is luck or fluke or whatnot, it would be like you're rolling a dice. Which egg am I going to get? Well, you don't know. Roll the dice. There is no such thing. The world is perfectly determined. The cycles are perfectly determined. And we have to ask ourselves, why is there this type of order?
Yeah.
And more amazing is that we have the ability as human beings, not the animal kingdom, to think at this high level. I love Thomas Nagel's argument. He says, look, if all there is evolution, we should only be operating on instinct. Why do we have these minds that think about these higher truths? What does that have to do with survival and reproduction? Who cares about all these existential questions? Who cares about them? Just survive and reproduce, man. I could have made a lot more children. I could have had a lot more offspring if I just didn't think about these things all day.
Not only this, and he's really onto something with that point. But there's something else. If we are going to have this intelligence, which, by the way, intelligence correlates with behaviors, especially if you look at sociologically at the Western world, behaviors which are not conducive to survival and reproduction. So people who are like super intelligent commit suicide. Mm-hmm. People who are super intelligent are less likely to have children and whatnot. But the most important thing is that if we were to actually somehow get beyond our instincts, but we want to use our intelligence for survival and reproduction, each and every single one of us should be just waiting outside a sperm bank.
Absolutely. He's right. Thomas Nagel, he's right. There's certain things we have that are we could have been more efficient at survival and reproduction. But I guess what atheists would say, to be fair to them, they might say, look, we didn't say the system is perfect. You're just good enough to survive. Because it's not really survival of the fittest. It's survival of the fit enough. I think we have to give them a little breathing room. Do they really mean survival of the fittest? I think that sounds really cool, but it's really survival of the fit enough, which brings me to the next problem. Okay. Some philosophers accuse Darwin, and this happened immediately when he released his theory, that it's mainly a tautology. You could fit any narrative. So for instance, if a peacock fans his feathers out and he's very beautiful and whatnot, it's to attract mates. Yet if the peacocks have a very bland type of feathering, that's because they're more camouflaged. So which one is it? Well, if it's survival of the fit enough or fittest, it's a tautology, because you're basically telling me in your definition that I can read almost any narrative into any object. Now I go out in the world and I find fitness. It's a subtle point. It's not an easy one to understand, but basically, if the peacock has fancy feathers, it's to attract a mate. If he's camouflaged, he looks like his background. Well, that's because he's hard to. I'm gonna put a new narrative now. I'm gonna say he's able to blend in his background. He's harder to hunt. So I can always fit a narrative around what I find.
Which is, something that, it's a related point that Stephen Jay Gould makes about this, which is that Darwinists usually give, even though he himself believes in Darwinism to an extent, he says they normally give stories which are consistent with natural selection. But giving a story which is consistent with natural selection is not an iota of evidence of natural selection. It's just a story which is complete.
That's what we have to understand. And I'm not against that at all. I want to make my position very clear. I'm just saying, look, what happened to Aristotle is going to happen to us. Because we're not that much smarter than Aristotle. Okay, like he was a genius, and he had narratives that came across his desk that made sense, that fit his worldview, that fit the evidence he observed. He didn't know these are optical illusions. He didn't understand these, but he had a limited set of knowledge compared to us. Today, we're in the same boat, is what I'm trying to say. Our narratives are fitting the evidence well, and we could have switched narrative if the evidence was different, and we can't be surprised tomorrow and we can't put all our eggs in one basket. We can't say these narratives are eternal. Things could overturn them, is what I'm trying to say. So Thomas Nagel brings up certain objections that I find are very interesting, and they're food for thought. But we shouldn't be reprimanded for being skeptical about the consensus.
Yeah.
You know, the scientific. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying it's right. All I'm saying is, in the past, we've had a lot of great consensus. You know, very powerful consensus that over time were changed. So me, when I tell you the world is transient, the world of science is transient, I'm not anti-science at all. I'm 100% full science. I accept everything that is not a universal. All your universals, for me, I reject them. Nature for me is something, it's a bookmark. It's a name for a collective. It's not something out there in the world. And no philosopher, I think, who's truly worth his salt would say that universals actually exist.
Yeah.
It's more of an expression over time that people took literal. So, you know, you always got to remember the ship of Theseus. Remember the ship of Theseus? It's a ship with 99 parts.
Yeah.
It's got 99 parts. We call it the ship of Theseus. So we make a universal in our mind. And then every day a part is replaced. So after 99 days, that ship has 99 new parts. And you're still calling it the ship of Theseus. You've been sailing around that ship for 99 days, calling it the ship of Theseus. And then all those parts we replaced, we put them in a warehouse somewhere, and somebody reassembles those parts. Now, which one is the ship of Theseus? Actually, ship of Theseus is really in your head. Those parts are really all there is. The ship of Theseus came after you assembled the parts. It's a universal, describing a set of particulars. The universal is not concrete. That's why in the Quran, God is always referring to him. One of the reasons why. He's one. God is telling you, look, I am a thing. Objective, not subjective. The ship of Theseus is subjective. Some people might say the original parts of the ship of Theseus. Some might say, no, that's just our idea of the continuity of those pieces. So for instance, every cell in your body has been changed.
Yeah.
Since your birth. You don't have an original cell left. Are you still the same person? Yeah, we'll have to say yes. Because there's an essence to you that hasn't been changed. What if somebody were to go out in nature and find every last molecule of your body that existed in the past and reassembled some kind of sabur zombie? All the cells you've shedded over the years, and we reassemble your body. We'd say, look, that's not sabur. This is like his dead skin, his dead... all the things he shed. So human beings are more than that. We have an essence to us, and that essence is known by the mind. But everything that's known by the mind, I know this might be a little too much for one conversation, but everything that's known by the mind is ultimately dependent on mind. And that brings us to Kant's transcendental argument, which might be too much for today. But ultimately, Kant says there's a divine mind, and he's not the only one. He's not the only one, okay? I mean, Heisenberg, if you look at his quotes, he in Anthony Flou's book, he has a chapter where he talks about everybody who refers to this divine mind. This one mind that ordered the universe. It's not blind forces out there bouncing around at random, like rolling of a dice. The universe was ordered, and then we attributed these forces to that order. But the forces are never observed. It's just as miraculous to have a whole egg as if somebody turned water into wine. It's just as miraculous. It is just as consistent. There is no order in a random world. We don't live in a random world. We live in a highly ordered world. That's what these scientists are saying. We're observing order in the universe.
And therefore, these types of arguments that they make, the virgin birth is a violation of the laws of nature. No, the laws of nature are just your limited understanding of the patterns that you perceive. So the fact that reproduction happens between a male and a female, and then you in the Quranic narrative you get a virgin birth, for us is no more surprising from God's point of view than if that virgin birth didn't take place, if you look at the two trajectories. So there is no violation of the laws of nature, because sometimes I find amongst these atheists, they speak about laws of nature as if the tablet of Moses or something, right? But really, if we look at it from the perspective that you're speaking about, there is nothing that we should expect about the world that means that it's going to work in this mechanical way.
Well, here's a thought experiment. Erase everything you know about human reproduction.
Yeah.
And you're observing a female in nature and she becomes pregnant. To you, it wouldn't be strange. Let's say she becomes pregnant, she's a virgin, or pick any natural phenomenon. It wouldn't be illogical. There's nothing illogical about it.
Yeah.
It would be the first time it happens, and that's what you would think babies emerge naturally. The reason why you think it's not possible is because every instance of birth you've ever seen took a male and a female and they reproduced it in a certain way. There was a cycle to birth. There was a pattern to birth. Now that pattern is broken, but that pattern is it's exactly what you're saying. There's no logic to it. It just so happens to be that way. You add logic afterwards. This is what's known in philosophy as bottom up. You observed it and then you rationalize. Top down is it has to be so, and then we go into nature and we find that it's so. So this is a bit complicated, but believe me, there's a difference between top down and bottom up. If I erase everything you know about human reproduction, you have no memory of it, you have no knowledge of it. Any way I present it to you is going to make sense. If I show it to you over and over again, you're going to expect it to be like that in the future. This is what I was trying to explain on Rogan. Again, this is British empiricism, guys. It's not me making this up, okay? This is Ghazali. For the Muslims who want to reject, both of you, Westerners and Muslims, you are in the same boat. You both have to accept this. Both your most refined thinkers agreed with this. I don't care if you're an atheist Westerner. I don't care if you're a hardcore Muslim. You must accept this. You must. This is something we have in common. Yeah. The reason why we believe things are going to happen, the reason why we believe in these cycles are going to happen again in the future is because we observed them in the past. They have nothing to do with your intellectual prowess. Okay, you guys, wow, we feel we're so reasonable, rational. No. It's due to your memory. It's due to your past experience.
Even going back to this example that you gave about the pregnancy, right, happening, you could think quite clearly of a situation on Earth where women are going around walking around and eating apples and then falling pregnant from that because it triggers something inside, and it triggers like some sort of embryonic development. And then one day a man comes down from the sky and there's reproduction in another way, and that would be odd. That would be like, oh my God, what the heck is that?
Think about, look what they say about the first cell. What did they say happened to the first cell? So let's assume now there's a first cell.
Very, very good example.
What happened to the first cell? Did it have a mate?
Well, they would say the first cell was a self-replicating molecule.
Okay, so replicated. Today, I'm a byproduct of that cell, correct?
Yeah.
I'm an assembly of those cells. Yeah. I don't self-replicate my species now anymore. At one point, it self-replicated itself. Now maybe my cells replicate themselves within my body. That has continued, but now I'm this collage of cells, and now I need another entity to replicate. So the pattern changed over time, and maybe something happens down the line that's completely gonna be new to us. But that's what I'm telling you. How do you know how the laws of physics are going to behave when there's complete entropy, so to speak? When there's complete chaos? We don't know. We've never observed a universe in maximum entropy. So why is it illogical to say that life will begin again? Why is it illogical? It's not illogical.
One other way of thinking about it, and I sometimes say this to atheists in Speaker's Corner when I'm having debates and stuff, if it's happened once, and even if you believe it's an accident, then there's a chance it's going to happen.
But what's an accident? Are you rejecting Newton? There are no accidents in Newton mechanics. There are no accidents.
Yeah.
People need to familiarize themselves a little bit more with Laplace and Newton and understand what determinism is. Because every time you say accident or randomness, if you mean that literally, not a figure of speech, remember we talked about why human beings use the word randomness, because they're saying that, look, I can't compute all the factors. I can't compute them all. So I'm just going to say, look, random.
Yep.
I'm just saying, look, my mind cannot follow all these possibilities, all these chain reactions that are happening in nature, in the outside world. There is no actual randomness happening. It's all predictable. It's just our inability to predict it. So every time they say, "Oh, we're here by fluke," they're slapping Newton in the face. Really, they're misunderstanding Newton. Newton would disagree heavily. He would say, "No, it's impossible." Now, again, Newton believed in the mind of God, the order of nature. And if you want to say that we're crazy, you have to say Newton is crazy. Newton said the order of nature is by God. It's created by God. It's put in order by God.
Well,
you don't find disorder in nature. You find perfect order.
Yeah. And interestingly, he wrote more about theology than he wrote about philosophy.
Absolutely.
Than he wrote about these things. So let's sort of summarize there, because I need to it's getting late, so I need to head off home.
Of course.
I really enjoyed this, and what I'm actually thinking is that, inshallah, what we should do is maybe perhaps we don't even label the next time we go live. We just call it just a live discussion and speak, because I feel how we go into one area and then we actually open up a new sort of discussion about yeah, it is, because I found a lot of these things are interlinked now. Yeah, so I think these conversations are definitely, I'm learning a lot, so I can see in the chat a lot of people are very interested as well. But let's go back, Firas, if you could summarize the whole topic that we set about science being this be all and end all, and the first and the last of epistemology, when it's clearly not.
Well, first of all, philosophy, you should just now forget everything you heard about. Philosophy just means logic, okay? Yeah. Be a logician. Accept science. Believe science is true. Just don't accept their narratives. We just want to know the patterns and regularities. Don't give us a narrative. Science is not here to tell us about God. Science is not here to tell us about morality. Leave that alone. Just tell me about the behavior of the outside world. That's all I want to know. Yeah. We'll interpret it from our worldview. You're not here to impose your worldview on us. Okay? That's the number one thing. Logic is halal. Science is halal. Their narrative is their narrative. They didn't see evolution in a test tube. Evolution is a universal. Tell me about the particular, what has been observed. And then we'll add our worldview, just like you add your worldview to it. We'll add our worldview to it. And we'll cross-examine each other at nauseum, and we should do it in a positive way. But above all, I really believe Muslims should be incredibly moral. A Muslim should be the most moral person you know. A Christian, a Jew, anybody who believes in the Abrahamic faiths. You have failed Islam if you're not if people don't see you as a moral human being. This is extremely important. Okay, you have to be. Morality is paramount. So logic is important. Science is important. Philosophy, meaning understanding, having deep thoughts. Okay, contemplation is important. But morality is the backbone. The Abrahamic religions are supposed to teach the world about morality. And today's day and age, people are scared. Unfortunately, some people are scared of Muslims. It should be the furthest thing from the truth. People, if your neighbor should feel completely secure living next to you. They should feel completely harmonious. They should feel actually protected by you. Just recently in Canada, some deranged man ran over a Muslim family.
Yeah.
Islamophobia is on a full
rampage.
It's on a rampage. Why are they so scared of us? Well, there's a lot of propaganda against Islam. Every time a human being interact with a Muslim, all that propaganda should melt away. Be kind, be generous, be soft with people, be patient. Even if they don't agree with your worldview, be patient. Educate yourself, protect your worldview, understand why we say what we say in the Quran. Why do we believe what the Quran says? Why do we repeat it? Why do we tell people we should agree with our worldview? Why do we tell people this makes sense? Educate yourself. And if you don't know, don't talk. If you don't know, don't talk. Study, learn. You have the fitrah, you cannot go wrong. But above all, Islam needs good and moral Muslims. Everybody who interacts with a Muslim should have a positive experience. That's the truth. And if you don't give them positive experience, you've failed your religion. People should think of Muslims as the most moral people. Those people, you can't bribe them. Those people, you can't tempt them. This is how Muslims should be viewed as. But unfortunately, the media does a great job, and Muslims also do a great job to pollute that vision. Muslims are supposed to be the most moral people on earth. Jews, Christians, every time we see them on the news, they're fighting each other, whatnot. We have to be the most just, the most just, fair person has to be a Muslim, a Jew, a Christian, somebody of faith, because there is no morality. If there's no God, there is no morality. And guess what? If there's no God, there's also no truth. Everything's up for grabs. Everything is interpretable. Nietzsche said, you can't get to the truth, so believe whatever you want. You have to be God to get to the truth, right? But we're born with a fitrah. We accept the fitrah is true, and from there, we accept there is truth.
Yeah.
I really feel that Muslims should be highly educated, logical, chase logic to no end. If you really believe in God, then this is what Ghazali says. If Allah is true, then we should follow logic to no end. Why are you scared of logic? Why you feel you're going to be disproven? We're never going to be disproven. Science and logic will never disprove the Quran. Never. Never. Maybe there'll be an apparent contradiction. The problem is within yourself. Think deeper, you'll find the answer. But above all, Muslims today need to be encouraged and reminded to be moral human beings. Because right now, especially what happened this week, some deranged man killed an entire family, only one surviving person. Why? Because they're scared of Muslims. Why are they scared of Muslims? A Muslim should be the gentlest, sweetest human being. We can prove to them that we're a benefit to it's a benefit to them to have us in our society. So this is something I think we need to remind the ummah more of all the time.
Yeah.
Morality is paramount. Justice. A Muslim is supposed to be the most fair person you ever met. The most fair.
Even to the point that Allah says in the Quran to speak justice and to do justice, even if it's against yourself.
So,
and there's something so powerful about that as Muslims, that not only do we, when we morally fail, we say, yep, I'm wrong, but also when it comes to like intellectual arguments we may be using or certain things, we'll be happy to say, actually, that's wrong. We're not going to use that. So we're not like, sometimes you get these certain brands of evangelical Christianity in which it's kind of like they'll use an argument, whether it's valid or not valid. Or, for example, in Africa, one of the things that we faced as IERA is sometimes the Christian missionaries will go to the the people who recently accepted Islam, or people who they're going to be interacting with Islam, and say, oh, these guys, they worship the devil. Like, as Muslims, we are so confident in our worldview that we don't need to lie. We don't need to use arguments that are false. And in fact, when we do use arguments which are false or make a mistake intellectually, we can just simply say, no, we were wrong. However, one thing we're not wrong about, and something we've been mentioning throughout this live stream, is science becoming into scientism and becoming into a worldview in of itself is something that Muslims should not fall into, because I think sometimes Muslims get overly impressed by these things. And two, we should call out the emperor without any clothes. We should actually say, none of this makes any sense. Science isn't the be all and the end all, and it's only going to give you an impoverished way of looking at the world. So we'll leave it there, inshallah. May Allah bless everybody for joining us. Sorry we couldn't go through the comment section. There's actually a lot of people commenting. So until next time, Firas, I know you're super, super busy. So I'm going to try and get you on in maybe 2 months, six,
inshallah.
Whatever, inshallah. But yeah, anything you want to add before we go?
Salam to everybody out there. Thank you for tuning in. And I hope to continue this conversation again in the future, inshallah.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu